Okay, welcome to the public session of the February 11th, 2020 meeting of the Yarmouth Board of Selectmen. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first item, public announcements and comments. Anyone? Vita.
Vita Morris, on the subject, one of my favorite subjects, I guess. The school building. What's the situation about the permitting fees? Do you have to take a vote or something to make sure that those are included in the total cost of the building?
She's talking, Dan, about the negotiation with the school committee, school building committee, trying to get down that $5 million or so, and she wants to know what has to be done on the part of the town not to waive the building fees. That's the question.
Yeah, so we're waiting, I'm waiting to hear back from the design team when a decision definitively has to be made by the board as to the carrying cost on that. So we have a meeting on
That's coming Thursday.
this coming Thursday on that. So we were told that there was a period of time still available before that has to be decided, but we're moving closer to that time.
I thought they were pretty much going to have the final numbers, so that they finally trimmed down to the $5 million.
As we left it in the last meeting, the architects were doing some internal configuration of the building to try to cover the gap. I think it was like $262,000.
Well, that's, okay, so, but that amount included the permitting fees, right?
That's right. The total that needed to be cut back to get to $5 million was about $260,000. So we left it at the last meeting that the architect would try to find savings within the project, and he'd report back to us at this upcoming meeting.
Well, I understand. All I'm interested in is, we're not waiving the permitting fees. That's, I guess maybe I didn't put it quite correct.
The board hasn't voted on that.
The board hasn't even been requested.
Right.
No, we've brought it up as a topic of discussion that it came up in the last building committee meeting, and at some point, when we know what date it is that they have to get down to the $5 million mark, then we can put it in front of the board for a vote. But right now, the project is carrying that cost.
I think, I don't know if this will help or not, Vita, but this board really hasn't been officially asked to do anything or to vote on anything. It hasn't reached this board's level yet. Dan was merely reporting on the status of what had happened thus far in those negotiations, and it was suggested that perhaps by someone that gap could be closed by a waiver of the fees.
Yeah, so what we were waiting...
But it wasn't a position of the towns.
Yeah.
Okay, so the normal procedure is that whoever is the proponent of a project or whatever, they have to ask for the waiver of fees. Is that correct?
Right. That's correct.
And you haven't heard from the district or anybody, and so therefore, the amount of the fees is now included in whatever they have to trim.
Yes,
Okay.
and I understand from Dan's comments that they're looking to do that in other ways. The architects are trying to do that in other ways to close that gap without a fee waiver.
Without it, because they have a sense that maybe the fees are not going to be waived, right?
That's what
I hope so. I mean, I certainly hope so. There's no reason for, this is a district project. It should be, those fees need to be borne by both towns, I think. And yeah, we will pick up 65% of that, but we should get the participation of Dennis at 35%, because it's a, am I right? I mean, this is, anything having to do with that project is split that way,
Correct.
right? Now, does anybody know what the situation is with Dennis participating in the feasibility fee, giving us any money for that, towards that, because the last thing I heard was from the, at the school committee meeting about a month ago, when the chair of the Dennis Selectmen came to the microphone, and he continued the old mantra, we're still discussing it. Does anybody know what the status of that is? I was told today that what they would need is to put that on the warrant, at the town warrant this year, so that they could, you know, and I assume that since it comes under the new building rules, that they would have to contribute 35% of whatever the feasibility fee was, right? The net.
I don't have any personal knowledge of that. It would seem to me that in the course of the negotiations, they've always maintained that they would pay, quote, their share of that
Yes, exactly.
appropriation. However, they would not quantify it. They never quantified how much it was. What you say stands to reason that if ultimately it was agreed on a 65-35 split, it would be reasonable to assume 35% would be their
Yeah,
share of
because
that.
it was
But-
always undefined, but
But I
now.
don't know if they've taken any action in that regard. Does anyone else on the board have any information on that?
The only thing that I can offer is the last time we discussed it here, which was, I'm going to say, 4 to 6 weeks ago, somewhere in that neighborhood. I corresponded by email with Chris Flanagan and asked, what was going to be done. And he got back to me and said that their board was planning to place it and to reimburse
Place it on the
Yarmouth
warrant.
on the warrant, and reimburse Yarmouth for their fair share. And I think he phrased it that way because he didn't know what the exact percentage was. So, whether it's
Well,
for-
these days, after the agreement and everything, it's signed, it's 65-35, right? Forever, anything having to do with,
correct.
So I don't think they
That's
have much of
having
a
to do with
choice.
the school, right. I think there's another confusing factor in this, in that I think the feasibility study cost is included in the entire construction budget, is it not?
No, I think if I remember this correctly, at the time in which you are invited to participate, they calculate for you the percentage split or reimbursement that MSBA would give you. And I think at that time, it was much lower than what we ended up on the project cost, right? So I think if I remember correctly, the entire article that was at 2016 town meeting was $750,000. Of that dollar value, a percentage of that would be borne as assistance by the MSBA, maybe
Right.
at like 40% probably back at that time. Then what we're talking about is what was the total dollar value on the project? Did we go all the way up to 750? Then we would split the difference after what they didn't reimburse. That's
Right.
correct. I don't
Okay.
know what that number is offhand right now.
Yeah, and it's not a,
no, I
an
know, that's why I
absolutely
said
clean
net.
calculation, but the general sense that I got from Chris Flanagan was that they were committed to paying it, subject to whatever the calculation was. And I don't know what the number is either, and it's somewhere over, north of, 200,000, I think, but it could be above or below that, so.
Well, I think it might have been helpful if this kind of thing had been included in the settlement agreement.
Yeah, we tried.
I'm sorry?
We tried, yeah, and it was up to the school committee what to put in that agreement. So, we tried, and that's all we can really say about it.
Next week, I'm going to try to see if I can straighten out the FY20 budget and the basis on which it was, bases, I should say, it was done, and what exactly the story is. I'm going to be meeting with Ken on that subject.
Thank you, Vita. Anyone else?
Yes.
Good evening. First of all, I want to apologize for crashing your meeting at a little while ago. I apologize for that. I was just eager to be here. My name is Eleanor Mendoza. I'm from West Yarmouth, and I'm a resident for, I own the property for over, 40 years. Anyway, I also have rental properties, and in the past few years, since the town implemented the online payment, it's been a very difficult, I find it very difficult, and to renew the rental registration online. I have spoken with, several people that had the same problem, including the health department. They also mentioned that they have heard that many people have been having the same problems. Also, I was last week and this week with the personnel at the administration, and they relay the same thing. So my question to you, and I'm trying to pay the registration for all, three properties, and of course I would like to take advantage of the break and on the rate, on the fee, and unfortunately because of the program, they're not allowed. It's not, you have to be a geek to really to be able to go through. So my question to you is that, are you aware of the problems that the property owners, that have rental properties, are encountering when trying to register online?
This is the first time I've heard of it.
No, this is news to me. I do know that some folks need some assistance on that, but this is an online programming. It's been in place for a number of years, and the vast majority of transactions go without a problem. So,
may I suggest, with due respect, and speak with the personnel in the health department, and also in the administration department. I spoke, today with Linda, and last week with, Pam, and they both, share the same idea. So I would, highly suggest that you, find out, what the situation is with this program for the health. I'm not saying about the water or the real estate or the others, but with the registration for the health. So I am in a conundrum here because I would like to pay, actually the first effort that I had was back in January. Well, not back, January 27, when I wrote the check for $70 for each property. And the health department did not accept and said it is up to the selectmen to decide that, because they decide that we're not allowed to receive that. So that's why I'm here. And if somebody can give me a little bit of clue, I have the check here, for all the properties to make the payment. And just wondering, what do you suggest?
Dan, maybe.
So if you pay in person, it's $80 a unit. If you pay online, you get a $10 discount. Okay. So what she'd like to be able to do is to pay, because she's having trouble paying online, to get the discount and pay it in person.
Do we have your can you give Dan your contact information, and perhaps we can have somebody reach out to you and help you through that process?
Well, what happened was when I first encountered, this year, I called the health department, and Christine, she was very kind enough to we spent a good half an hour. You can check, all these information that I'm passing on to you. And then we came to a point, one of the properties, as a matter of fact, actually was the first one, is a duplex. So when we got pretty much to the end, she figured out that I had to go back because you only mentioned that one property, not two, because it's a duplex. So at that time, and I said, I will be able to backtrack, and that was the disaster, because I tried to backtrack, everything was erased, and there was no way I could go back. So I tried on my own to do that, and then so I came back, and I mentioned that to them. I said, listen, I'm really, really trying. I mean, I'm not a completely person that doesn't work on the computer. Yes, I do a lot of work on the computer, but this is above and beyond. And then there was, was a consensus in the office that there was a problem. That's really, really problem. And it's not the first year that's been happening. And I know I encountered the same problem last year and in the year before, and I'm really surprised that you have not heard from the people that really deal with the homeowners, and so that's I just want to bring that up to you. So, but it's been about a couple weeks now, and I'm going to be, as a matter of fact, yesterday I did. Voting, absentee voting, because I'm going to be going away. I just want to, settle this, and I was just wondering if you can suggest me what to do. I have the check right here for all 3 properties, and I'm more than glad to, leave it pay because they, could you please?
Well, I'd suggest that possibly we take the check.
Mary Alice in Health Department has your contact information, I believe, right?
Excuse me?
Christine or Mary Alice has your contact
Oh,
information?
yes. Oh, yeah. They're
she would've
both
went to
fully
check for
aware,
a
and they're
lower
the one that
amount.
told me that it's been a problem, not only
That's
this
who
year, but the past 2 or 3 years.
Yes.
I suggest we take a check, and
Tracy,
we work
yeah.
on the issue, and if
All right.
there's a $30 difference, I'll be glad to pay
If you
it.
want to take
If
the
she's
vote.
having a problem with the check,
Excuse me?
I mean, I would support what Tracy says, is accept her checks. Let's,
So you want to take
As
the
a matter
vote?
of, as a matter of fact,
yeah, let's have, Tracy, you got a motion?
You got it.
You have a motion?
We're not waiving if she's, if the health department acknowledges that there's a problem,
Since
whether
I've
they
been
do or
here-
they
No, I
don't.
know.
Somebody's trying to pay and do the right thing.
But the problem was, though, in the way it is it's the actual fee, in-person pay is 80. Electronic, it's 70, so that's a fee
Okay, and that's,
delta.
that's
We don't
fine,
have
and I
that.
understand that, but if everybody recognizes that there's an issue, I mean, what is she supposed to do?
I think that I'd like to have some time to try to resolve this with the staff.
Well, I'd like
Because I
to,
don't want to get, because the problem that you're going to have is this is not as common as you would think. This is, to me, this is the first time since I've been here that this has come up. So what I'd like to be able to do is have the staff do the inputs and try to get it through electronically. The problem is, what you don't want to be is the appeals board here. And anybody that might have this situation come in front of you, next thing you know, you got like a blanket waiver. And that's what we're trying to avoid. The system has been in place. Rich, how long has this permitting system been in place for?
For, I don't know, a number of years, and I can say that I have dealt with this circumstance in the past, and to the extent I've involved myself in those circumstances a couple of times, I've been able to resolve it relatively quickly. Not to say that I'd have to look into this particular circumstance with this person here. I just don't know, but perhaps it could be some issue that doesn't allow it to be processed through the system. It might be a unique or not a common issue that might occur, that therefore the system just doesn't handle that, and it might not be a simple fix that has been the other 2 times I've handled this. Which might be why, but, to Dan's point, the fee, and that might, I appreciate the position she's in, but that might be a reason why the fee is $80, because you can't process it online because it doesn't, and do you want to put yourself in a position of being the appeals board? But that being said,
well, if they,
I can work with the staff tomorrow and see if I can resolve
if you
it.
want me to make a motion on a fee waiver, that's what I'll do. But, I mean, if the woman's come and spoke to 4 people,
I understand
there's a
that, but-
breakdown
But the
somewhere.
staff doesn't have the ability, nor myself, to waive a fee that's been established.
I understand, but they
Yeah.
could have helped her through the process to get it
Well, I
done.
understand Christine tried, and I'm not sure what the hangup was, but like this just came back to my office this afternoon. This is the first I'd heard about it, so I didn't even have a chance to look into this. And I was not aware that Christine tried about a month ago to help the resident related to this, and it didn't solve the problem. I'd like to know what happened last year and how it got resolved last year. Did you pay $80 last year, or Or was it
I
able to
have
be done?
the check here with the
No,
three
for last year, last year's pay.
Last year, what happened was exactly the same problem, and there was someone in the back of the health department that came, was a young fellow, and he was a geek. And I think he worked there. And he said, I can do this for you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to erase your password so I can do it for you. And then, when you get home, you have to, establish another password. So that was the only way and that I was able to do it. And the year before, again, was the same problem, but the health department did accept the check for $70 opposed to $80 because it was. So this problem has been going on for quite some time, and this is the first year that they're not accepting, although they know there has been a problem for some time.
I make a motion that the board accept the $70 per unit fee so basically ask for a $30 waiver for the online fee, seeing as it cannot be accomplished online.
I'll second it. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
I abstain.
Mark?
I abstain.
So we have 2 affirmative votes and 2 abstentions. Such courage.
I think we should allow Dan to solve the problem.
Well,
Sounds like it got solved before, so we just have to look into it.
Please do.
So could you please translate that for me, please? So
You don't want my translation.
So we'll have somebody,
or mine.
I mean,
we'll have
what are we
somebody,
going to do? I mean, what would you
We'll have
suggest
somebody
me to do?
we'll have somebody contact you tomorrow to, I think it sounds like maybe perhaps your password is frozen up. So we'll take a look at internally if there's something that we can do related to the software program.
So what would you suggest me to do now? Stop by again tomorrow?
If you could stop by tomorrow, that would be great, and we'll try to track down that employee that helped you out.
No, that's it. So stop
I don't
in the
like to use
health
that word.
department or
Yeah.
your
It's broad
department?
brushing. No, come to my office, and I'll make sure that the powers to be that could help you are available.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Sorry for your inconvenience.
No,
I
it's okay.
apologize.
There's another one.
I'm sorry as well. Okay, anyone else on public comment? I hope not.
I've asked the town clerk, Phil Gaudette, to come up and give you kind of a brief overview. This is a state primary coming up. There's early voting involved and absentee and all that. So Phil, without
Yeah.
further ado.
So the presidential primary is upon us, and so is early voting. Early voting, as you may know, is it's just like absentee voting. I call it no excuse absentee voting. Whereas if you've ever absentee voted before, you need an application before you can get. You got to fill out an application before you get the ballot. With early voting, it's just like you're going in to vote. We check you off on a list. We give you an envelope to fill out. You go cast your vote, and or you cast your vote, so to speak. We take your ballot, and the ballot is processed on election day. So early voting takes place the last week in February. It's February 24th to the 28th, and it'll be in the hearing room, just like like a normal polling place would be. In years past, we would have early voting just at the clerk's office, and just makes the voting experience just a little bit better by having it in the hearing room with voting booths and things like that. So it takes place the 24th to the 28th in the hearing room. Will be open until 7 p.m. on Wednesday, February 26th. Tomorrow, February 12th, is the last day to register to vote for the primary, and so my office will be open till 8 o'clock tomorrow to take anyone that wants to register to vote. If you can't come in, you can always register online, and you have till 12 midnight to register online to vote for the primary. So that's really it. I encourage everyone to come out and early vote. And so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we ever get any funds from the state for this early vote?
Sure, yeah, we do. We get some reimbursement from the state for extending our hours. We haven't been notified yet whether or not we'll get funding for this election. In times past, for the general elections, when we've had early voting, if we're opened extended hours, we will get funding for that. And I believe there is a grant that will come to place right after early voting, right after the election, to offset some of those costs. And it equates to maybe about $6,000 or $7,000.
Thank you. It was very popular.
Yes, yeah.
Is that all in overtime costs? Is that what?
It helps. It helps just offset the costs of staffing it and some overtime costs. Yeah. That's it.
Thank you. Everybody get out there and vote.
Phil, there's no Saturday on this one. But
No Saturday.
is the Secretary of State talking about a Saturday on?
No, not this year. The Secretary of State and the legislators dictate when early voting can take place. And this year, or for the presidential primary, it's only for 5 days, and that's Monday through Friday. For the general election, it'll be 2 weeks, and there'll be a Saturday. Yeah.
Well, there will be a Saturday for the
Yeah,
general.
yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much, and please get out there to vote and register and early vote.
We'll be able to tell who won, right? This won't be like Iowa.
No. You'll be able to know.
All right, thank you, Phil.
Next topic is the use of the drive-in site for the Irish Fest.
Yeah, there's a request for a waiver, basically,
Yeah, that's,
and there's a recommendation on the part of Jeff that we waive the security deposit, and there's also in here the policy, or not the policy, but the guidelines in determining whether or not a security deposit should be charged, taking into account the level of responsibility demonstrated by the event sponsor in the past, whether the event is sponsored by the town, the facility being reserved with due consideration given to its condition, the length of time the event sponsor has been in existence, and the nature and duration of the activity to be conducted on site. So why don't you introduce yourself and address those criteria?
Sure. Good evening. My name's Patrick McDonough. I'm the event organizer of the Yarmouth Irish Festival that's being held at the Yarmouth Drive-In. And I know that there's a new policy in place which requires or asks for a security deposit, and I guess I sit here before you tonight asking if there could be a waiver to that policy based on our track record and our history of the event over the last couple of years, that we've pretty much left the grounds in the same shape as we had the event, before the event and after the event. And whenever there was like any issues whether it became like trash or anything like that, we were very responsive to make sure that anything was fixed, whether it be a tire track and adding grass seed or something left over from a vendor, to make sure that that was quickly removed. In addition to that, I do have an insurance policy as well that's it's a certificate for the town that provides it's $1 million for, I'm going to read it, sorry. It's $1 million for each occurrence, but there's also a $100,000 policy that I've presented if there's any damage to the facility as well, that I have on hand.
Yeah, that other one's for liability.
Liability, yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, anyone have any questions?
I don't really understand.
Right.
But he's not asking for a fee waiver?
No, he's asking to be exempt from a security deposit.
What is that deposit? And what is it, what is
I
the
don't know.
purpose of it?
Jeff, do you know how much the deposit would be normally? Or would it vary depending upon the level of activity there? Or would it be up to the discretion of the
I
board?
have it, but it doesn't say
Yeah.
the amount.
So
or
I think in the policy itself, it gives the discretion of a security deposit to the Board of Selectmen. It doesn't prescribe what that security deposit be. So I think
Okay.
based on staff discussion and Patrick's, Mr. McDonough's track record, that the general consensus was he was very responsive, especially last year with, he loamed and seeded something, got on picking what needed to be picked up, that perhaps with event sponsors who have some kind of track record with the town, that we may not really need the security deposit.
So basically, we were requested, we put it in the policy because in case they left and didn't do their due diligence, we had money to rectify the
That's right.
situation. Okay.
That's right.
I guess I'm thinking that there's a misinterpretation here of the way the policy reads. It says in Section 13, the town may request
It's in
a
G.
reasonable security deposit be determined on a case-by-case basis.
In section G.
I'm reading paragraph 13. And Section G says a security deposit shall be required as outlined in the rules and regulations. So I'm reading the rules and regulations applicable to a security deposit. And it says the town may request a reasonable security deposit. Now, we haven't been asked to charge a security deposit in this case.
Well, I think that that's what we're
so-
suggesting, that perhaps you don't need to.
I guess I'm not sure why we would need to have action in each case.
It's a new policy, we're working
It's
through
in,
it.
yeah, I know, I'm wondering if
It
there's kind
happens,
of
like,
some
I have other
circular.
things I read that there are, deposits that are made,
So, but none of the fees in terms of the expenses to the town are requesting to be waived?
No.
Okay. Well,
I'll make a motion that we waive any security deposit in this case, but I also would secondarily say, unless there is a need for a fee in the future, that I'm not sure why we would need to take action on each individual application
Okay.
for use of the site.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to waive the security deposit for this event, the Irish Festival on March 7th.
We may need to just look at that again. I know it's a new
2020.
policy, but we should probably tighten that up, but
I think probably going forward, there should ought to just be language on maybe a sliding scale, depending upon how many people or how many days, that there's a set fee for whatever that it looks like, and we'll propose something to you. And then you can decide if you want to waive it at that point based on someone's track record. I think in this particular case, it was just kind of preemptory, but
thank you.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to waive the fee. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? The security deposit has been waived. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, now the next item is possible vote on the Starbuck Lane property.
Oh,
Tracy, you going to make a motion on that?
I'll make a motion. I hereby move that the Yarmouth Board of Selectmen acquire 2 parcels of land located at 45 and 55 Starbuck Lane, Yarmouth, identified on Assessor's Map 115, Lot 9, 91.1, 91.2, known as the property, by purchase for $150,000 for conservation, open space, and passive recreation purposes for the general public, consistent with provisions of Mass General Laws, Chapter 48, Section C, 310 CMR 22.00, and Article 97 of the Amendment of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as approved by Article 35 of the May 4th, 2019 annual town meeting, and further grant a conservation restriction for no consideration to a qualified entity, and further authorize the town administrator, Daniel Knappich, to execute and enter into a purchase and sale agreement and any and all documents necessary to effectuate the purchase of the property and the grant of the conservation restriction.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Next item, budget review, municipal operations, Articles 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. Rich?
Thanks. Hello again. I am Rich Bienvenu, the Acting Assistant Town Administrator, and I am presenting to you as Acting Technical Services Director the budget of the Municipal Operations Department. The department does a lot of functions. Primarily, the staffing is geared towards the IT operation, but in addition, we do work in the purchasing procurement function for the town, energy coordination, website and media, town project management, which primarily of late has been regarding the wastewater effort, and that is in why I'll be talking to you about those separate articles in addition to the budget for the department, and provide all manner of support to various departments on a wide-ranging front of issues. This, since it is primarily IT-focused, in your packet is the handout of this presentation. You can read through the mission statement, but as with most of our departments, primarily focused on customer service. Most of our customers are internal customers. It's been a busy year, particularly for the IT shop, and I'm recognizing them here on some of their progress they've made in various projects. The big one, as you'll recall, last year, I think we were talking about the so-called flood of Town Hall from the frozen pipes, destroying servers and our server room. That has been that process of negotiating with the insurance company a settlement on payout of that resulted in just under a $300,000 settlement, of which that money was repurposed to buy new equipment, re-site our server room to the upstairs server room, and to put all our servers, not all of our servers, but the vast majority of our servers at Town Hall here in a virtual environment, which has been a process of not only installing and implementing those new pieces of equipment, but also learning some new methodologies in managing that. In conjunction with that project comes kind of hand-in-hand disaster recovery services. We have a whole new setup and equipment in place as to disaster recovery. We had a backup solution that was a little bit slow and unwieldy, and now we have a new device, it's called a Dado, which backs up things online, as well as having an internal device for which we can do incremental backups of specific PCs and specific files on a day-to-day basis without having to download anything and research anything and back up the entire network. We've also made substantial progress, and particularly of late, on what's called the subnetting project. As you might recall, the discussion in the past, the town had been on a flat network. That meant that wherever you were in town, you had access to various network services in other parts of the town. It also meant that if we were subject to an attack at one location, for example, at the septic facility, let's say, that could impact the network throughout the whole town. With the subnetting, each location of the town's network is its own subnet. And if we have a problem at one location, we can isolate it to that location and shut that down and retain services for the rest of town. So that's a big project we've been working on, substantially complete, moving to public safety to finalize those facilities shortly. And then with the new DPW facility, we kind of hold off our efforts in that regard because there will be some consolidation and moving of offices over there. But as part of the new facility, they would be on our new subnet. We've also been working in the public safety departments with upgrades to servers and dispatch equipment. We've had a lot of replacements of PCs. We are lucky to receive last year, presented to the Capital Budget Committee, a plan for a ongoing PC and equipment replacement program. And so this is the first year of implementing that program, and have in fact replaced quite a number of PCs that were in quite a bit of need of that, as well as converting our PCs to a Windows 10 environment. And then finally, we've spent a lot of work. You can't quite see the detail there, but we do have a lot of applications that we use. You heard at public comment one of the applications, and we're doing a inventory of how we're utilizing those applications, the extent of use, and opportunities to improve utilization or changes in the applications altogether. And so that has happened and is ongoing and is part of our capital budget request this past year, and how we are going to set ourselves up in our operations going forward. And that was quite a lift on our project management team. To summarize our budget, in our budget book that you were previously provided with, there's a little bit more level of details of some of these numbers, but here's the summary of our budget. With the exception of wages, I shouldn't say with the exception, there's not a lot of room to manage things here, in the sense that, particularly in the area of licenses, we have what we have, and in some cases we are kind of beholden to our vendors as to what those support agreements and licenses cost. And so we find if you have an opportunity to make a change, or find that we no longer have a need for a certain number of licenses, for example, we could cut back those licenses. But typically we found it to go the other way. We have a certain number of licenses for a certain application, but then as the public starts utilizing it more frequently, those licenses aren't sufficient to be responsive to the demand, and therefore we find a need to have to increase the licenses. That was the case last year, and this year we don't find that particular need. We think we're pretty good with the number of licenses we have. However, the cost of those licenses have increased. And so for the same level of service and support, the budget in that case goes up about $24,000, a little over $24,000. IT services has to do with, in this case, on the bottom of the screen, $6,500 for increase in Comcast, not Comcast, internet connectivity. So primarily we use Comcast, but secondarily we also use the Open Cape network as a failover. So in the event that, as you might recall, all of our fiber goes out to various town locations and comes to Town Hall as it is the sole point of communication, and goes out to the internet through Comcast. In the event that there's a failure in Comcast, we need a backup to that system, and that backup is the Open Cape network, and it is now set up to automatically switch over. Barnstable County used to fund that Open Cape connection through their RWAN program, what was called the RWAN, and they no longer fund that, and so this would be the first year that we'd have to pick up that cost of $6,500. Another $6,500 has to do with an increase related to our disaster recovery service as part of the insurance program that we got a settlement on. We got money to put us through that first year. They covered that first year service, but the cost of supporting that disaster recovery from where we had a manual on-site backup service to this online automated backup through the DADO that I mentioned to you is about $6,500 more than what we had budgeted in the past, and this year it's not covered by that insurance payout, and that's added to the budget. Townwide telephone for $3,000. This reflects the actual usage and need. We do have an opportunity. Our lease on our phone system expires this June, and we are actually looking right now to see what a replacement might look like, which gives us an opportunity to examine the services we're getting related to the phone system, and I am optimistic that we will be able to decrease that, but absent any change there, that reflects our actual usage what we would expect based on actual usage this year going forward. Which finally brings us to wages, and you see that the wages are up significantly, but there's a reason for that, and previously we spoke to this, and that's on this slide here. Contractual wage agreements related to personnel contracts that we have with the staff are just about $12,000. And the big change here, two big changes. As we talked to you in the budget presentation, overall summary of the budget presentation, wages that were previously in enterprise funds, we're trying to take them back out of enterprise funds and put them in the operating budgets, and that one position is just under $75,000. Which was previously split between septage and water, is now reflected in the operating budget. And the second one was a potential new position of a media coordinator, and this was kind of the holding place for that salary and benefits of $75,000. And so that's reflected in that increase that you see here under of $161,000. So of that $161,000, vast majority is the reallocation from the enterprise funds to the operating budget and the new position, if we were to follow through on that. I do know that we will have some challenges with our overall budget that we'll have to adjust, and so I would contemplate that that would be one of the things we might have to drop, and we would look towards how we could accommodate what we had hoped to do with that otherwise. And one of the ways perhaps would be an outside consultant, and I've identified a couple possibilities in that regard. And so perhaps we could do something like that with almost like a pilot program through some free cash or one-time money asks.
That would be my suggestion.
Also new under the part-time wages is $16,000. It's not really new, but again, it was my suggestion as a overall longer-term effort of trying to improve our media operation. And right now, our camera operators are being paid out of our Comcast, separate Comcast fund, which is ostensibly capital, supposed to be capital related. But at the same time, we are also going through our 10-year license renewal with Comcast. And the bottom line is I do see a day where perhaps we approach this whole topic of the media, of Channel 18 and the media function a little bit differently. Several towns and the ones that in the past this board has suggested we go talk to typically have Comcast, at least a portion of your, if not all of the Comcast receipts in a separate enterprise type fund. And so this would be my effort to pull them out of the capital and reimbursement we're getting, put them in the budget with the longer term plan of once we settle a new contract and know what that environment looks like, that we would probably approach this and fund this operation a little bit differently. We have a lot of challenges. We have a relatively small staff for the amount of work that's accomplished and the amount of work that we have on our laps. We met several locations, and we are actually on the forefront. And I have to thank John Morris, our project manager, and Joe Hevener, our really the IT infrastructure manager, if you will, on accomplishing a lot of work, particularly with public safety. John has been working with the fire department quite a bit and has received a lot of kudos on implementation of various software applications, and we're going through the same process with PD. All those applications, and which are a little bit more sophisticated, all the way down to our basic applications, all rely on information security. And so we're looking at new ways to implement new products that will improve our efficiency to help us operate the department as easy as possible, but provide a higher level of security. And so we have several initiatives that we're working on now that don't necessarily impact the budget. We're looking to make those changes within the budget that we already have. Another challenge will be the townwide fiber network. As I mentioned, we have our 10-year Comcast license renewal. One of the things that they'll be asking of us is to, right now, they support and pay for our fiber between all town buildings. And they're going to want to get out of that as part of that negotiation. And so we have to find a way to transition from that to another solution, whether it's a town-owned or a other third party that operates that fiber. IT project management, I mentioned public safety. That's always ongoing and a high priority for us to support their needs. But for example, our town-wide financial management system needs a lot of support, and they are actually coming out with a new version that's going to require us to implement that new version. And so it kind of goes along lines with number 4 there on the operational model of IT, is that might present an opportunity for us in lieu of putting a lot of time and effort in training of end user staff and training of our internal staff to support that new version. Perhaps there's a better way. And the better way might be to have, instead of on-premises systems that we have to support, to have them hosted systems. And that comes at a cost. They're not presented in this budget, but it's under future issues. That might be the reason you might see a budget increase in a future budget, is because we want to change our operational model. And the theory there would be there might be some short-term budgetary pressures associated with that, but you're weighing that against a longer-term rate of return that hopefully is better than the short-term pain you might inflict on yourself.
Is this the Munis system that you're talking about?
This would be Munis, yes.
So, I mean, that would be something, Rich, that communities throughout the Cape and throughout the Commonwealth would be going through, would it not?
It is, and many of them don't have the issue that we will be facing with the upgrade, because they've long in the past already gone to the hosted application. And so you're always on the latest version in that scenario.
Okay.
Application training and utilization. You got a little bit of the insight into that earlier this meeting under public comment. Not only training for our end user staff, but how can we best support our citizens that want to utilize it. And a lot of changes in the applications. And for example, the Acela program that is a topic of discussion this evening. There's been some changes in that program and an opportunity that we need to evaluate about whether we want to continue using that in the future and what's the alternative. So we're in the middle of evaluating some of those opportunities. But in any event, being more automated and using these applications requires a training effort of our staff, and we need to ramp up. It's a constant challenge, because not only it's not just one of those things where you implement an application once and you're done. The applications update and they get changed, and the utilization of those change, and staff change. And so it's really need to provide for a constant effort to make sure that we're up to date in how we can utilize these things. And we want to increase the utilization of a lot of the tools. We have a lot of tools in town, and they're not always used to the best of its ability. And we've previously talked about media outreach and public education resources, largely having to do with that Channel 18 operation and our website. So recommendations, we would like some support to be able to address our media resources. I spoke earlier about shifting from on-premises resources to a hosted application. There's a lot of benefit, which we'll get into at the time that I present them to you. But usually those benefits are going to come at an additional financial cost on the short term. One of the things I hope to be able to get in front of you in future budget cycles and through the capital budget process would be ways to outsource those functions that we really don't need to be wasting our time and resources on, and really utilizing our staff for the higher value things that require our touches. And then finally, nothing new here, but over the past year and a half that I'd been acting in that position, I've been reaching out to various counterparts in various other communities, and there is an opportunity among us all to find a way to share resources. Change isn't easy, and so I take it upon myself to help motivate my counterparts to work together, and so I'll continue to do that. But any support that we can get from our community here and our town, our leaders and our administration in that effort is helpful. So I'm going to just stop right there for a minute, because that's my next slides have to do with the articles, which don't have necessarily anything to do with the operating budget of the department. So if you have any questions on that, I have a feeling that
the subsequent discussion here might be a little more lengthy.
I have a question on the media coordinator and, the possible outsourcing of that as opposed to hiring an in-house person. What is do you have any projection of what the cost might be of that kind of a contract? And how much time and effort would be involved in the bidding process if bidding would be required?
Well, bidding would be required, or at least a quote process. Probably what I would suggest is formal advertised bids, either through an invitation for bid or a request for a proposal, would need to happen for anything over $50,000. And so if we're going to move forward with any further support in this area, probably suggest is a contract that would be less than that, which would allow me to do a quote process. I'd have to solicit quotes still, but it's a little less formal. And it would allow me identifying resources that could be possibly available to us to respond to those types of quotes. And so it'd be a matter of crafting exactly what it is we're looking for. And it probably wouldn't be a full-time presence, but there's a lot of goals that we could have accomplished, establishing policies and frameworks of operations, and creating certain, having goals on creating of certain output of media, whether it's television or website, and things to that nature. But we have good examples in our surrounding communities of things that we'd like to have accomplished. So I think I'll have an easy time of putting that together, what that might look like. Okay. For example, some towns have a town administrator report, whether it's quarterly or occasionally. They have budget discussions and a weekly digest or a periodic digest of current events in the community. Various things like that are easy to quantify and put as a deliverable in an agreement of some sort.
Okay. The other question I have is on the backup that you were talking about, and what do you call it, subnet? Was that the
backup system is called a dado device.
Okay, but then you were talking about individual departments having their, yes, and I guess I was beginning to think about, well, how do you accomplish the backup process with these other functions being distributed out to departments?
Well, they're on our network, and so we can set the flow of information throughout our network, and that's how it's accomplished. If it's coming from our device to our device, we can regulate that. But what the subnetting does is, and our next step in this is a little bit a higher level of monitoring of these subnets and getting alerts. Mm-hmm. So if we get an alert that there is some sort of deviation in what we might expect at the network activity at the septic treatment plant, we can immediately shut that down or program it to shut down automatically so that we can investigate that before it infects, if it were an issue that might infect the rest of our network.
Okay. So are you saying that in other departments, they're not physically storing data or information in those departments on whatever computers they might have?
Oh, they may do that as well.
Okay.
And that's a whole nother discussion, but if you're storing on a town storage server, we have individual PCs, mm-hmm. and we have storage servers here at Town Hall, and so if you're saving to that storage server, that's backed up.
Okay.
Constantly on an ongoing basis.
Yep. All right.
And not only is it backed up on our storage server, it's backed up on our dado device, which you can unplug and take with you wherever you need to go, if you need to get out of town, for instance. And it's also backed up on the cloud.
Tracy, anything?
No, I think we had the discussion of moving forward with social media, and media person generally, I think, is a good way to go. But I do think that we probably will get more for our money in contracting out, at least until we figure out what it is that we want. So
And I guess that's how I'd approach it. It's an opportunity, almost, if you will, to pilot something,
Yeah.
demonstrate a result, and then do we want to build upon
Right,
that?
and you can craft your job description around something that's successful. So I think now it would be maybe a little bit, you want to make sure you get the person with the right expertise to check all the boxes. So that is one thing I support. I think I'd have a hard time hiring somebody right off the bat, because our requests, I think, are very diverse, and perhaps we do 2 contracts. Maybe we have a social media person, and we have a person who is going to direct or craft our what we want to produce as far as television or something like that. So that's just my thoughts. The other thing was, it's funny that you talked about the sharing of IT services. That was one of the MMA conference workshops that was discussed, and the gentleman from the town of Danvers, the IT director from Danvers, had his whole workshop on that. And the interesting part was they weren't even contiguous towns that worked together. So, and the folks from Dennis were there with me, so obviously they have some interest in possibly sharing services in that regard. But it was specific to the IT. So you get more coverage for, obviously you guys do a great job now, but it's just that in today's day and age, everything is technology, and
It's, we were talking earlier, the word simply, right? Sounds like it should be so simple. And the point is well taken, and that's why I am exploring these. But unfortunately, the difficulty is managing change and convincing people that they can change and that it's going to work out all right.
well, it's a lot of work, because, you think about the number of apps that we have, the number of apps that we've gone through the research for and the implementation and the training, and then to do it again is sometimes difficult. But
And despite that, we use a lot of the same apps, and so that's why I mentioned John Morris, for example. Of course, it escapes me. I have too much on my mind, but the application that our fire department use, a lot of other fire departments use Cape-wide, he basically took the lead in making sure that it's working properly for Yarmouth FD, which is the model for the other departments to follow. And so we are doing it, but in that case, we're kind of bearing the burden of that on our own, and others are benefiting from our efforts. So that's how we do things in Yarmouth.
thank you.
Rich, thanks for the presentation. I'm almost reluctant to say anything because I feel like I'm just going to be repeating myself. I'm glad that in the budget we're taking some initial steps to address this. I feel almost that it'd be nice to go back in time and have had this conversation a year ago so that we can have a lot of this in place by now. I'm very concerned that as we move forward on wastewater, the absence of having tools at our disposal, I know we're using them to some degree, I don't want to suggest that we're not, but that being able to have an aggressive communications presence on wastewater, I think has been our biggest challenge with respect to the wastewater initiative, the whole Clean Water Project. I'm afraid that this town meeting is going to turn into a huge session where people will be educated for the first time, that the inability to access other resources, in spite of some of the yeoman efforts that are going on, I think is going to be one of our challenges. We're going to have to spend a lot of time educating people on that project alone. I would like to see that, should the town meeting support the additional resources, that somehow we prioritize and put this at the very top of the agenda in terms of things that we do, things that we work on here on the administrative side. And I guess this is a conversation with Dan, because to me this is all part of keeping the public informed as to how their tax dollars are being used. the more we can get information out on the website, the more we can get information out in the TV channels, social media, the more people can follow what's happening with the DPW building, the not just the wastewater project, but look at all the other construction projects that are going on. There's a lot that the taxpayers have already committed themselves to in this town, and I think we just need to find ways to get this up and running so that they can keep up with all the work that has been going on and the work that's going to be beginning of the visioning process. Our communication tools can be incredibly helpful in terms of helping manage that whole process and updating the master plan and getting the community involved in visioning and so forth. So what I worry about in all of this is sort of a less than robust and aggressive pace on this. And I know internally, you folks are challenged, Dan. I mean, how many jobs are you doing now? I mean, you've got a lot on your plate. You're doing a lot. God bless you. I don't know how you guys do it, but there's a lot going on. There's a lot of work that you've got your arms around, and I'm just anxious to see an aggressive game plan going forward on the communication side. It might be helpful, I think, for the purposes of town meeting. I know some of what we're trying to do is kind of buried in here, but we may want to have an information piece, brochure, handout, or something that explains in a little bit more detail what we're trying to do. I left the town of, I was over at the Barnstable Town Manager's office the other day. They just created a new position, Communications Director. Lynn Poyant, the Community Services Director, who has been doing their TV channel and a lot of their social media stuff. Now they've elevated that position and they put it directly in the town manager's office. And so she's going to have resources to help, even do more than what they're doing now. And what they're doing now is significantly more than what we're doing. So I believe that communications, you're going to see more investments in this area. In other towns, I think, if you look at Eastham, Orleans, Brewster, Dennis, and as I mentioned, Barnstable, they're doing a lot. And to me, the key part of it is using these resources to keep the residents of the town informed and aware of what's going on, particularly all the good things that are going on. And it also can be useful in terms of helping generate really constructive feedback on the things that we're doing. Not everybody watches our select board meetings, in spite of the fact that we'd like to think that there's a huge audience out there. But the reality is that we need all the tools at our disposal. And this, given where we are right now, given the financial challenges that we face and all the projects that are going, is the most important piece of work that needs to be moved and moved aggressively. So I'll stop right there. I think some kind of better description of it. The way we've captured it here, I don't think gives enough service and enough merit in terms of what it all means in terms of public information and public involvement.
So to your point's well taken, and to that, that was the intention, is to be putting something together, not really knowing the direction. The sense at the moment is we're going to need revisions to our budget once we get the scope of our assessments from various other entities that we deal with. And so I'm sensitive to the fact that this is likely to change. So I guess the thing I would point out to you, if there's a need for it to change and not take this approach, that $75,000 for the position might not be available to us, but I'm kind of crafting a plan of how do we address it otherwise, and it would require, basically would come down to a free cash ask if we can move some free cash around, and then quantifying, as Mark explained, the need and why we want to do that, with the goal of, and the thing about the free cash, which would be nice, is it's an immediate available fund. So on April 28th, the next day, I'd be able to move forward on it, as opposed to in the levy, it's a July 1. And so we could start that year
Got it.
of service under a contract immediately, as opposed to waiting July 1 and then going from there. But at a minimum, what would be nice is, I guess I kind of gave it short thrift and trying to be brief in my comments, but that $16,000 of wages, part-time wages, is also very important. The main position is important, but even that smaller amount is important, because what that would enable us to do is we've got some great camera operators. Lisa Hale and Tom Nicanello are here tonight recording this meeting, and they work here pretty faithfully to get all these meetings done. It would now allow us to work with them a little bit more comprehensively and maybe expand some of the things that they do. But it also frees up, and if I can do that, it frees up some of the IT staff from doing media stuff, and they can focus on IT stuff. It just helps build the operation. So it all fits together, and I can do a better job of explaining that.
Well, I just want to make sure that whatever you're asking for solves the problem. I mean, that's what we should be doing, is focused on, is the amount that's being sought here in it, would you consider it solving the problem, making a significant dent in it, or are we talking about more half measures? You know, I mean, I think...
What's suggested here,
yeah.
I think it would make a significant dent in our problem, so to speak. I think I've reported back to this board at one point when I visited several of these towns, and to your point, Selectman Forrest, those other towns you mentioned that do a great job probably have at least 2, if not 3, full-time people that are dedicated to the function.
Exactly.
Okay, Rich, we're ready to move on.
Very good.
Did we give you the direction you needed on that topic?
Yeah, I understand the sentiment of the board. Yes, thank you. It's clear as mud, as usual.
Exactly.
A little bit better than mud.
Murky water.
Clear as murky water. So now I'm going to present to you the various articles related to wastewater. We talked about them briefly last night. These were not in the packet, but in the handout I gave you. These additional slides are in that handout I gave you tonight. Article 15, currently proposed Article 15, is to adopt a water resource enterprise fund. And so this would be, what this would do is provide a separate dedicated fund for wastewater. It would also combine related operations, our water, our septage, and stormwater operations. In this consolidated fund, each operation would still be budgeted for and accounted for separately. The rates associated with them would be rated separately. This enterprise fund would also maintain a reserve and capital accounts for each operation, generally separately. And so right now we have a water capital fund. We'd continue to have a water capital fund that would fall under the umbrella of this water resource enterprise fund. The main difference would be, first of all, it's just nice to have it all consolidated into one, but it would all the earnings, profits, or losses from the various operations would all be consolidated into one overall retained earnings. And that's what carries over from year to year. And so we had this discussion that typically, especially on the capital costs, you're not going to charge water a direct capital cost to pay for wastewater because you have legal issues. But what you end up doing when you have a consolidated retained earnings is an opportunity to, for example, the combined water/wastewater superintendent position that we're trying to fill now that you recently approved, with an example of how you could share costs within this one enterprise fund for multiple functions. This is quite hard to see, but I just want to get it in front of you for so it's not the first time, you're not seeing it for the first time at a future town meeting, but this is the language that we're reviewing with town council. I did already run it through the Department of Revenue and got an email back either yesterday or today on basically saying, great job, it looks good and you can go forward with this. So the intent of this, what all this says, is in order to get this water resource enterprise fund, we're consolidating the other funds, so we have to take a vote not only to adopt this, but to rescind the authorization of the original funds of the other things. And at the same time, all the assets and liabilities and accounts of those funds would move to this new fund to be accounted for in a consolidated manner. The second article in that slew of wastewater articles has to do with wastewater reserve funding. So this would be to begin the allocation of the various funding sources that were identified and recommended by the Water Resource Advisory Committee to wastewater reserves. They're identified in our funding plan, and we begin the pre-funding of the wastewater program. In addition to those things that are identified, if there are additional one-time sources that can help us to maintain some flexibility in executing that wastewater plan, perhaps we can take an opportunity to do that. And so to that point, here is a list of funding sources. At least the top three you've at least heard about before. Energy savings, $125,000. New short-term rental receipts this first year, we're just doing around $500,000. The one caveat on that is I'm working with the Department of Revenue to see how we can craft language to make it contingent. So in other words, we don't want to have an appropriation for $500,000, but if you only receive $400,000, you're stuck funding the 500. And I know the answer is you're not, but we don't want to get penalized in other ways for it. And so basically, you want to write the article that we get an authorization of up to 500,000 contingent upon the receipts coming in at 500,000.
Got it.
And if it comes in at 400, we're only transferring 400.
Or up to 500,000,
Exactly.
Why up to? Why wouldn't we want all of them?
depending on how much money we got.
Yeah, I mean, if you get 800,000, you only want 5 for this, but we're
Well,
short.
the problem
our-
is you've got to put something in the budget. And when you set your tax rate, since you're raising an appropriate, and that amount gets added to your appropriations you need to fund, and then you have a funding source, and the funding source is local receipts. And so whenever we have a local receipt, we have to go to the Department of Revenue, and they have to approve that that's going to be sufficient local receipt to pay for that appropriation. Now, this being the first year, they have no track record. Generally, their rule of thumb is you can't raise local receipts above what you collected in the past. You can, but you need to have a good explanation to them as to why you're doing that.
But we're not going to be bringing back an article every year. So, I mean, the article should be worded in a way that in subsequent years, that it can be a different dollar amount, right?
You could do that.
So if we get 900,000, what we're saying is we're going to craft an article that says up to 500,000 is going in this, so the rest of it goes into the general fund still.
If that were to happen, to your point, what I suspect would happen is we'd know that, obviously. Ed does a great job in the finance department, and we'd know if you appropriate 500,000 and we get 600,000, we know that 100,000 is a component of our free cash, and we could take that opportunity to add it to use that free cash to extra free cash to add into our reserve fund at that time. But the way I kind of envision this, and again, the budget process could change at your discretion. But in the future, once one reason is it's never appeared before in the budget, and that's why it's a separate article, for one. In the future, once these sources have been established, I would imagine that these top 2 sources would be part of the annual operating budget, and it would be in that Water Resource Enterprise Fund as part of that.
I think that we should earmark any of the new growth into that, because saying up to 500,000, putting it back into the general fund, and then in 3 years from now, we're going to ask to make up that we already know we're going to be short. We're going to ask to increase taxes on to make sure that there's enough money in the fund.
Well, I'll see if there's a way to address that. The reason it hadn't gone that way up front was the challenge of getting the Department of Revenue to certify a tax rate. If you've got a high, if we put in $1 million, we could put in any number. If we put in $1 million of short-term rentals, the bottom line is they're going to ask us to justify it. And I have to justify it in the same amount of the appropriation in order to keep things balanced.
So, Rich, the budget includes $500,000 of revenue then in our revenue projections. Is that correct? For the
overall
short-term
budget,
rentals?
you probably don't recall, but in your budget books and in your budget presentation near the end, there was a list of estimated receipts, and it separated last year's hotel excise, and then the next line was 500,000 of additional motel excise, or basically third-party rental excise, or short-term rental excise, for the new revenues coming in. They're in our local receipts.
But last night's presentation, you estimated 570,000.
You're right.
So to the extent that the revenues exceed the $500,000 estimate, the difference is going to end up in free cash ultimately.
It would.
So then it's a matter of, okay, playing catch-up.
Yeah, a year later.
Yeah, well, it's a matter of playing catch-up to get that excess.
That's not unlike we are in in our regular operating budget,
Not unusual.
right? I mean, we're, you've brought this issue up before. What's our budget for local receipts versus our actuals? And as you might recall, and to Selectman Post's point about, why is it the way it is? When I presented the estimated receipts budget to you in the budget summary, we were at, I think it was 98 or 99% of actual, just underneath last year's actuals. So, I feel good that we can get this approved through DOR as is without a lot of explanation, because in total, we're less than what our prior actuals are by just, smallest of amounts, but we're under.
But let's be honest, anything over that goes back in the free cash does not get sent back to that department the way it is. It's lost, and it goes to the
No,
general.
but you can earmark it, though, and that's kind of what we had talked about, doing any excess revenue that comes in beyond what we projected, we can earmark it when it comes in, and now with the option of having a fall town meeting, you can have some flexibility on that topic. So it's like an internal, we're just keeping track of it. It's not as clean as having a one-time raise and appropriate, but we still can catch up to it maybe 6 months later,
Yeah, I agree completely with that. I think from my experience with the Department of Revenue, particularly on this topic, they want us to be conservative on how we estimate revenues. And you're right, we're going to have to justify the numbers.
And, just because this was it's a long time between now and then this upcoming town meeting and next year when we got to go through this again, I would envision how we, depending on the outcome of all these various articles and the direction we take, we would modify accordingly going forward.
So let's say that instead of the 500,000, we designated this at 570 or at 650, whatever, a higher number, and we fell short. Let's say actual receipts fell $50,000 short. What would happen then?
Well, internally, we would have to work this out with our finance team. I haven't had this discussion yet, but in my perspective on that would be, you just wouldn't transfer the money into the wastewater reserve. It's like how we managed golf operations in the past, manage to the level of revenue we actually get. Just because, because that is a balanced budget as well. If you budgeted $3 million of revenue, you had $3 million of appropriations. But if you only had $2.5 million of revenue, you're going to have to cut back to keep at least a break even, right? So same thing here. If we see that we only transfer the receipts we actually receive, and if we come up short on the revenue, we would have a shortfall there, but we'd have a savings on the appropriation that would offset.
Okay. So it sounds like it's all, it gets complicated on the upside and less complicated on the downside. In terms of, I think to Tracy's point, last evening we, at least we started a vote with regard to a position, a policy, select board policy with regard to the allocation of these funds, and I think that's if what we can be assured is that all of the money that comes in from that source is going to be allocated to the wastewater reserve, then that's fine. But
it's going to be a perpetual problem. You're never going to know what you're going to get the next year until you get it. And so you can put in any amount you want, but the reality is that some future point after you've received the money, there's got to be some sort of settle up. So what's the mechanism to do that? I think
a policy.
on a longer term solution, if we had a wastewater Water Resource Enterprise Fund, and the new receipts was dedicated to that fund, which we don't have yet, so we can't do that yet.
Right.
Then it just would fall in there, and the extra would fall to retained earnings.
That's exactly what I was just thinking. We do it with the water department. It would be
Right,
the
and
same.
so the problem, point is, we're just not there yet because we don't have the Water Resource Enterprise Fund, and
Okay.
the town, so I guess what I was saying, in the future, if we have this one-time article for these funding sources of funding wastewater, and then this year we get a Water Resource Enterprise Fund, what you would see is that next year, instead of a water operations budget and a septic operations budget, you'd see a water resources budget with the funding line being short-term rentals from third-party rentals.
Perfect.
So there's a long, this is more, not just this town meeting and this budget, it's
Simple.
considerations for, we simply do it different in the future.
So the septic enterprise retained earnings is going to be reallocated to wastewater, or is that?
So the third item on there is a septic enterprise retained earnings. Septic plant that we operate as an enterprise fund has significant retained earnings and is very much related to the nitrogen issue and wastewater issue. And we thought it appropriate to utilize some of those savings. It is in the RAC's financing plan, not till future years, but if we have an opportunity now to get a jump on that and to make sure that we achieve those goals that are in the financing plan, we want to take an opportunity to do that. The one challenge associated with that is, since the time of that idea coming into our brains and talking about it and then laying it out, that it might be a path we want to follow. Subsequent to that, we've got some news regarding increased costs on septic sludge disposal. And we're having issues with that we have to work through. And so I have to get back together with Ed Centeo and Jeff Colby to make sure that we feel comfortable that that's the appropriate amount to utilize. And we're not taking it and shorting ourselves to resolve the other issue with regards to sludge disposal.
Do you have any broad figures, rough figures, as to what that increase might be?
Which increase? The sludge disposal?
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm prepared
are
to
we
talk about it
talking
right now.
it's
But
upward
Jeff
of-
will be in front of you presenting his budget, and I think that's an element of his presentation. He can give you a sense of that.
Okay, and then the last question I have is, to beg the question, but to make sure that it's clearly understood, is what is the source of the last 500,000?
Well, the source is free cash, but I think the deeper question that you have there is, how did we generate that free cash?
Correct.
And I guess that changes from any particular year, the sources of free cash generation. You did have an update a month or so ago. Ed was in front of you, giving you a free cash update, presenting that we had $3.4 million or whatever it was, and how we got generated. The last fiscal year, much of that generation was from local receipts. So performance of local receipts came in significantly higher than budgeted in FY 19, adding to our surplus, which gets certified in the form of free cash. And so that's on there as a Board of Selectmen policy discussion. I don't know to what extent you may have or may not have had this, but we wanted to put it on there. We have this tremendous need that's been presented before you that you've been talking about for a long time. A lot of funding challenges associated with it. We're talking about our pre-funding stage, and would the Board of Selectmen want to entertain adding some flexibility to that pre-funding phase? And this would be an opportunity to do it. And of course, that's your discretion and recommendation to town meeting. You still have an opportunity to modify this article.
I, for one, cannot support that. I do not believe that there should be any general fund appropriation into the wastewater reserve funding. I mean, nobody comes to my house and volunteers to have my septic tank cleaned. If I have to replace it every 30 years, nobody comes and volunteers to do that. And there's no town funding available to do that. And I'm not going to be on the wastewater system. And there's many people like my household in our town whose funds in this case would be utilized even though they continue to incur their own costs. So I don't think that it's appropriate to take money which belongs to all of the taxpayers in this town and allocate that in this fashion.
Well, I mean, the same can be said for improvements that are done to a certain area in town on the north side, for example. People on the south side don't benefit from that to the same degree, at least, that people on the north side do, but yet they pay for it out of public funds, so.
Right,
I'm
but
not
all
so
those
sure.
facilities,
I'm not
all
so
those,
sure I follow that logic.
all those facilities are available to town residents. That's not the case. It's not the
In a
case with
theoretical
wastewater.
sense, yes, but
Yeah.
people that live there are the ones that generally.
Well, this was a commitment that this board stepped up to 5 years ago when the first sewer proposal did not pass, and that was to avoid general fund impact. And this is a general fund impact.
That was not the policy I remember. We were trying to not raise taxes. That's already been, that money's already been raised. I understand your point, but we're sticking with our policy of not raising taxes on the general population. That money's left over, so it's gonna.
So why don't we take the $3.5 million that's in our
we have a free cash.
entire
So we have,
safety fund and allocate that to wastewater?
well, we
same
have a free
principle.
cash that goes to things, all different types of things that you may not directly utilize, but it is a benefit to the town. And you turn your water on, you get clean water, so I think everybody benefits to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, it's customary to use free cash
Go to
for
the beach.
capital.
The
And I
beach
think
is-
that's what we're talking
This is not
about.
capital that is available to the entire town. This is capital that's available to the wastewater users.
But the project's going to benefit the town as a whole.
It's
I mean,
gonna-
I'm assuming people in Yarmouthport drink Yarmouth water, right? We're doing this project to
That's a
protect water.
stretch, Mark. That's a stretch. I mean, going back to the basic principle of using general funds, general tax funds, to subsidize wastewater. And whether you say we're not going to increase taxes, or whether you say we're not going to be able to decrease taxes because we cannot use that 500,000 for the benefit of the entire community. And that's just parsing words.
Well, we spend how many millions of dollars educating students that you don't have children? It's the same thing. We all do things and participate in programs that, I mean, I haven't had an ambulance ride in I don't know how long, but we pay millions of dollars because that's the service we provide to the.
No, I haven't had the police respond to anything in my community since I can remember, but I'm happy to pay for the police to benefit the people at
All I can
large.
say is this is a very slippery slope. And I won't participate in voting for the wastewater system if we allocate general tax funds to the project.
I think the general population sees the value in that expenditure personally, but that's me.
I'd offer an alternative to the board if it was interested in exploring a difference. The free cash element of this could be allocated to something else, like a capital stabilization or other stabilization.
Or reduction of taxes.
When has that ever happened?
What?
When has that ever happened? Good idea, though it may be. When has that ever happened? Where you've taken free cash and reduced taxes? I've never seen it. Although I'm not, opposed to that, but
It's only something we've been asking for.
With the needs of the community, generally, I mean, there's more than enough demand to result in that money being spent for various municipal purposes, but I'm not opposed to the concept of paying less taxes, believe me. I've just never seen that materialize.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a procedural question. You're looking for the board to endorse the articles for the purposes of at least
No.
getting them on the
No,
warrant?
No, this is,
Or what-
so the articles, because we did that when we closed the warrant, this
Yep.
is your opportunity to review the articles as they are known at some point later in the spring, before we go to print. To the extent that we can, we'll ask for a recommendation. You don't have to do that tonight.
Okay, I'm just trying to gauge what's the level of input, at least on these articles.
This is more getting you ready to.
Got it. No, I'm very, very,
At
very
that point,
comfortable
then,
with both of them.
Dan suggested, we will need some sort
Yeah.
of direction from the board as to what the recommendation is as to what's to be offered to town meeting and what the recommendation to that article is.
I understand. And I understand you're also reviewing this with Department of Revenue, so based on those discussions, they might be tweaked a little bit further. But so far, I'm very comfortable with them, so far.
Okay, well then Article 17 has to do with adopting a water infrastructure investment fund. And so a while back had sent out information to you on this, a one-pager, but this kind of summarizes that. It's an option under the general law that allows for a local option statute to be accepted at our community to oppose a surcharge of up to 3%. It's deposited into a separate account, or a separate fund, I should say, and it's restricted for water resources, work, infrastructure. Any disbursements out of that fund need to be appropriated by town meeting. But in order to adopt it and get it going, you need a town meeting vote first and a ballot vote. So how does that practically affect us? RAC has recommended this fund as part of the financing plan. If we were to be adopted, these initial contributions would be part of the pre-funding phase of that reserve, which provides stability to the project financing. But we need to determine amount, and I guess the prior comments apply. You don't need to decide that tonight, but we do need to make a decision at some point, and I guess your recommendation could be as part of that or defer it to town meeting floor. But I put down here kind of where I think we stand on that. The RAC has recommended a 1.5% WIF for the eventual full funding of the debt service associated with the project. We've been discussing a $100,000 residential exemption, which is about $500,000 of savings on the CPA side. So the equivalent of that is 0.78% of a WIF, which to provide in total the same $500,000, so a net neutral. And then we've also discussed what's 1%. 1% is $630,000. Not quite even, but not too far of a difference. That might be more of those things, substance over form. Not in part, not to speak for the board here, but is it easier to talk about a 1% with a town meeting? When do you get confused with a 0.78%? That's your discretion or your sage wisdom on that matter. But I think those are some of the considerations of what's easier to discuss in the context of all these things.
To be clear, the 1% would result in the same issue that Norm raised, in that you would have $130,000 of taxpayer funds that would be going to this project, correct?
That's correct.
At 1%, whereas that would not be the case with the 0.78%.
Correct.
Well, I'd support the 0.78% at this point in time, and, in the future, I think that there's a lot transpiring in terms of revenue and different items, 0%, maybe debt forgiveness. There's a lot of pieces in this that could come clear in the next year, and if we have to take other actions. But at this point in time, I think 0.78%, while it's a random number, it's easy to explain. It's a net neutral. It's net neutral to the people. We're transferring it from one to another. So that's something I would support.
Well, it's net neutral on a total basis. It's not net neutral.
Close.
Individual property tax owners. What this is, the .78 is different from a $100,000 exemption from the CPA tax, which would amount to what, $30? Or
$3.
$3? $3, yeah. So, every household would get a $3 reduction, and then a .78 percent of your total tax bill increase.
78 cents, if 3% is $3, 0.78 would be 78 cents per 100,000. So if you have
Per
$1 million
100,000,
house, you
per
do
100,000.
78 cents times 10,
Right.
$7.80 versus the $3 reduction.
Right. For what size home?
$1 million house.
For $1 million?
That's just my quick math. Well, hold me to it, but I
Okay.
think that's right.
That's good.
But to your point, the point is each homeowner will have a little bit of a different circumstance depending on the value of the house, right? Everybody gets the $100,000 exemption, which is equal for all homeowners. Those that have a house valued more than somebody else are going to, 0.78 of that higher value is going to be a higher number than, my house might be lower value.
But so's the 3% currently that operates the same way. If you have a house that's worth more money, then that 3% results in more dollars.
It's progressive.
It's progressive, yeah.
Well, if you have a $4,000 tax bill, it's going to cost you is it $28? Well, I asked you last evening to come with those numbers, Rich. I'm sorry, but because
I can come with those numbers.
While it washes in total, it doesn't wash by property value. So homes of different sizes and tax assessments would end up paying more or less. The only home that would be, for which it would be equivalent, is a $100,000 home, which I don't know how many of those there are in the town. But
None.
yeah, so everybody else would have a tax increase.
It wouldn't be for a $100,000 home. The first $100,000 is exempt. So it would be for a $400,000 home that would be neutral, right? Because the first $100,000 would be exempt, and then that would be transferred to make it equal. Am I wrong?
I hate to speak it without having done it, the work. I certainly can do the work that Norm's requested. I just didn't have an opportunity to do it today, and I can, clarify it. But I don't want to speak to it not being prepared and not even having a calculator in front of me to do that, because the worst thing I could do is put the wrong thing out, and then.
We don't want that.
But I understand the question, and we can respond to that.
Well, I think it's the best possible scenario, given what we have. I think it's within, a small percentage difference, perhaps, but I think that the CPC made a good point about being able to keep it's a win-win. It's not a perfect scenario, but the amount of matching funds that we could lose by transferring the percentage from the CPC, I think, is real.
And CC, they would get the maximum funding under this proposal because they would still be charging 3%, at least on the face of it.
Correct.
So they get the maximum matching funds. If they reduced it, then they wouldn't. If the CPC tax was less than 3%, then they wouldn't get the maximum match.
Correct.
So that's basically why this is originated, really, to kind of preserve the maximum matching funds that would be available and trying to reach that $500,000 or $630,000 figure, depending on which way you wanted to look at it.
So when you have that information and ready to make a decision, here's what this article would look like. And can't can't quite see it well on the screen, but there's a yellow highlight there about a little past halfway through that, where I haven't filled out the percentage. But the
Yeah.
language, other than that, is set. And once we know that, we would insert that. That's what this article would look like. It's being reviewed by town council, but I don't contemplate them having an issue with it.
Right. The CPC matching, based on Rich's email to me, was, that would be lost would be $26,000. Yeah.
At what level, Norm? Any
If
reduction
we
at
didn't, if
all?
we didn't get to the 3% level.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that,
That was for FY19, I believe. It changes, that is accurate as to a recent year, either 19 or 20, but it does change. It's been lower in recent years, but there's been talk about increasing that match again, so.
And, to look at this otherwise, the CPC funding has gone up annually, not just by the regular taxes, but also as a result of overrides. And the impact of that CPC funding as a result of overrides is $351,000 of additional CPC funding. The impact on our taxpayers of the original passage of the CPC funding has been dramatic. And it's not just gone up by 3% of regular taxes, it's also all the overrides that have occurred over time. And so, 300,000 here, 300,000 there, and sometimes, eventually you're talking about real cash.
We'll have to get some direction at some point from the board as to how you want to propose, we can prepare this article and prepare your recommendation, but we'll have to come to a decision point. This one also requires a ballot question. So not only do we need a decision point one way or the other for town meeting, but there are some timing considerations with regards to a ballot question, which is 35 days before the election. So April 14th, I think that is. Article 18, along the same lines of thought here. If you're going to introduce a water infrastructure fund with the goal of matching that by a corresponding offset somewhere, you've been discussing a reduction to the CPA. And so you've got two opportunities that we've talked about, or two paths, I should say, for that. One would be the residential exemption, and one would be just a straight reduction of the surcharge amount. I've proposed the language of what that would look like. The top is the residential exemption. We don't need a percentage. We don't need anything. That language is ready to go. It just cites the section of the law and the amount of the exemption of $100,000. The second choice would be a reduction, and that's the proposed language, and we need to fill in the amount. Article 19, not really much in the way of discussion there, but I wanted to get in front of you so you have it at least, a few times before you actually have to decide on it, what that language might look like. And here's the latest language that we've been discussing, and I believe both Dennis and Harwich at this point have agreed to this, but things could change a little bit as we get closer. But here's where it stands now, and if to the extent it does change, I'll give it back to you and present what the changes look like.
I'm curious about the wording in this, in terms of what happens if it's amended.
Amended at town meeting floor in another community?
No, I mean, in the future. It says a copy of said agreement is on file. So even if it's amended, they'd have to file a new one with the town clerk, or how
Right,
would
so
that be?
that's,
Or is that something that says as amended from?
so by the time we need to vote on this, I think the thought is that we'll have finalized any work on that three-town agreement, and that will be set in stone. And town meeting, when they vote this language at this article at their town meeting, is voting it in the context of what that agreement at that time says. So Dave Young gave you the latest changes. I guess we'll go through the 3-town Board of Selectmen meeting process and see if anything further comes from that. But shortly thereafter, that agreement language is going to be buttoned down so that when we go into town meeting, we know what we're voting on.
Understood. I'm talking about in the future, as
Yeah.
amended in the future.
My sense is they have to,
File it with the town
each
clerk.
of the town meetings are going to
So it
have
doesn't have to say as amended or whatever.
That's my understanding.
Okay. Yeah,
I think it's going to kind of be like the school agreement, because it's going to be the same in every town. I don't think there's going to be any allowance for amendment, would there be?
There's amendments within, allowed for in the agreement.
It has to be approved by town meeting, but it does allow for amendments.
There's a process for approving amendments to the DHY agreement.
Right, but I mean, at the time it's voted, we got to have the same
It's all-
agreement and the same language for all 3 towns.
Correct.
It's got to be set. We can't have like Dennis amending it or Harwich amending it and then the other 2 towns voting for.
Well, they could
something
amend
different.
it. They could amend it.
We'd have to revote it
had to
again.
be-
Then we'd have to have another meeting, yeah. Hopefully that won't happen.
This is why having town council there. Serious.
And finally, proposed Article 20.
you go.
Jeff briefed you, and I briefed you on this last night a little bit, but we don't have language yet on this, because we're still fleshing it out a little bit. But it would be contemplated to be a bond authorization, $5 million, and we're working on fine-tuning that to the extent we can. But I would point out that this is independent of the DHY decision. This is for Phase 1 collection system design and some limited construction associated with doing work that we'd need to do to coordinate with the Mass Department of Transportation on Route 28 roadwork projects. The reason for that is ultimately, in the longer term, over the course of this project, is to save costs. So we're putting up a little bit of money now to do some limited construction on that coordination so we can save significant dollars on the ultimate project. And again, that's independent of the DHY decision. That work needs to be done whether we're doing it the Yarmouth-only plan or the DHY plan. As Jeff spoke to last night, right now the estimate is for $3.5 million for design, $1.5 million for construction, and $250,000 for project management, which would be an OPM. This ask is part of the overall project cost that we've been talking about of $126 million. So we're not adding $5 million to what we've been talking about. So all things being equal and everything going according to plan, the next ask at the worst would be the $121 million. Simply, 121. Also-
Is the 126 the collection system?
That's the total, no, that's Phase 1 total and a plant. That's the cost on the DHY option.
But but the 5 million is on the collection system. Well, it's not part of the 126 million DHY.
126 million is our share of the DHY plant and our collection system.
And our collection
For
system.
Phase 1.
Okay.
I think the plant portion of that's, what did we say it was, 70 million of it?
It's not that much.
No?
No.
Again, I hate to put the wrong number out
Okay.
there, but
I saw it last
important
night.
consideration of this. It will allow us to move forward on some grant applications. We've got one in the pipeline identified, and there potentially are others. Bottom line is, the granting agencies don't really even want our application until they know we're serious in doing something, and we have to have a financial commitment and a financial match associated with it. And so the grant that we are hoping to do is an EDA grant. Other communities have got it. Most recently, Bourne has gotten a $2.5 million EDA grant for planning and design costs for a wastewater system, where we'd be looking for the max, which is $3 million.
Rich, how would that work if this design is for the collection system, correct?
Correct.
So how would that then work with, I mean, those funds would be set aside so that it would apply to the collection system as opposed to the construction of the wastewater plant?
Oh, absolutely. Remember, we've kind of consolidated them, talked about them in total for simplicity's sake.
No, I know.
But
Yeah,
they are
right.
2 separate projects by 2 separate entities, presumably, if you go with DHY. DHY would be managing the construction, design, and construction of the plant.
Okay.
We retain 100% control of our collection system and are responsible for that. And which is good in some respects. It allows us to move at our own pace and how we want to move. And so, again, DHY is just the plant.
Well, yeah, my concern was with mixing of funds and therefore sharing of a grant, which was originally
It's interesting you
applied
say
for
that.
with regard to the collection system, and then it gets,
No, so if we ask
50%
for,
of it
I've already
gets-
cleared that up with our potential funding source. She liked the regional approach, and we would encourage DHY to do their own grant application for the plant, and they might, in fact,
right.
be successful. But in any event, we're going to be hopefully asking, the next couple of months on that, and that's going to be our ask, and it'll be our award and our grant to offset our costs.
Okay.
Timing's important. Why are we doing this now? If we could put this off, perhaps we would put it off. I know we have other issues on the ballot and, under consideration, but timing is important. Jeff's working with DOT, trying to set up meetings to nail down their timelines and their needs. But it does seem like we're going to need this funding sooner rather than later to do that coordination in an effort to save costs in the long run. And it's important to get started because, and again, I don't want to speak too much to it, but I did mention to you last night in discussions with Weston and Sampson about the whole issue related to Harwich bids and this whole discussion of what the bid environment currently looked like then, what it looks like now, and what it might look like in the future. And when you could get that update from them, I think that would be a great, hopefully they'll make that part of their presentation because the bid environment is extremely important in what you get for bid prices. And we can do all we want in estimating what things ought to be, but the price is what our contractors and vendors bid and provide to us at a moment in time and not in a vacuum, right? So if that moment in time is a time of high demand for services and low employment and low ability to hire workers, that our prices might reflect that. So this would be a town meeting vote. At this time, if we can line up our wastewater financing sources in the previous articles, we wouldn't contemplate this being on the ballot. We don't need a debt exclusion. If some of these things don't come to fruition or don't pass, then we might have to reevaluate that. But at this point in time, if this slate of articles were to go through in the way I think I understand it, we don't need the exemption, or exclusion, I should say.
Let's hope that it does.
Anyone else on these articles? Any questions, comments?
No, excellent presentation.
You all
Thank
set,
you.
Norm? Tracy?
Good, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Rich. I see a couple fire guys back there. The fire department budget presentation next.
got it. I stole it already. Yeah.
Just want to quickly mention, when Rich talked about John Morse and the programs that he's working with us, the program is called Image Trend, our ambulance reporting software. And not only, with John Morse's help leading the charge, we're not only leading the Cape, but we're leading all of Massachusetts. So we were the first in the state. The state joined our committee to work with us to move this forward into Massachusetts. So with John's help, we've been able to do tremendous things. Kudos to John Morse.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, what it amounts to is the patient care report in the ambulance that's on the laptop can be electronically data transferred to the hospital ahead of the ambulance getting there. And that's huge for patient care. So again, we're leading the charge throughout the state, and it's through John Morse's efforts. He's been a rock star for us, so we appreciate the help. So good evening, and thank you for allowing us to come before you. The highlights of last year, that's a snapshot of the calls for the last 3 years, 2017, 2018, 2019. It's a steady increase. We went up 110 runs from last year. We also were very fortunate with your help and the townspeople to increase the staffing by 4, and that was fully funded through overtime savings, ambulance fees. We're very fortunate to get a SAFER grant through the hard work of the deputy chief, which will help fund those positions for the first 3 years, 75% the first 2 years and 35% for the third. We also acquired another assistance to firefighters grant for bunker gear for $177,000. The bunker gear lasts 10 years. Each member has 2 sets of fire gear. So we're going to be able to buy 55 sets of full fire protective clothing for our members, which is a huge benefit to protect our members. We also, through the work of the deputy, got the vehicle exhaust grant, upgraded stations 1 and 2 with new vehicle diesel exhaust removal systems. Those are installed and up and running and working very well. So those are the figures for 19, 20, and 21, the actual figures there. As far as 2020, we are on track as of the date there, which is when we did it to the Finance Committee was January 11th. We're at 53% spending for the year, so I think we're on track still at that point. We're currently just under 59% here, almost the middle of February. So the changes in the budget, or the increases, the collective bargaining agreement in FY 2020, we did not have a increase yet because the negotiations were not finalized until late fall. So 21 budget reflects the COLA for both FY 20 and 21. We also planned for retirement when members reach maximum age and years of service for retirement. We plan for them in case they decide to retire in that fiscal year. And also our expense budget, which has been level funded for as long as I can remember, we were finally able to increase that by $35,000. We've been absorbing several increases over the years and robbing Peter to pay Paul from other accounts and unable to do some things. So $10,000 of that went to professional technical, which covers new hires, physicals, background checks. We also had increases in ambulance licensing. Also, our paramedic recertification, EMT, and CPR, we now have to be nationally certified. We used to just be state certified. We now all are mandated to be nationally certified EMTs, paramedics. So there was an increase in that, which was basically an unfunded mandate that we had to absorb. And vehicle maintenance has been lagging for several years. Our equipment is large and expensive when it breaks, and so we were able to get $10,000 additionally for vehicle maintenance, which will be a huge benefit going forward. So our challenges, we have many. We narrowed it down to this list. We had 2 different studies done by Collins and Matrix. They stated that our staffing should increase by 16, which would be 4 additional people per shift. We currently hired 4 since then, which is a great start, but I think moving forward, we need to continue that, maybe 4 every year or 2 until we get up to that level. We're currently still shorthanded on a daily basis. The second one is we'd like to move our dispatch to the Station 3 upstairs and look to hire a director in charge of dispatch upstairs at Station 3. After the tornadoes this year, I witnessed firsthand sitting in the South Yarmouth Fire Station with another lieutenant, and I were dispatching until we recalled some more members in from home. And our building at Station 1 is not a hardened facility, and I was hoping that the roof was going to stay on, to be honest with you, while we were in that room. The building was moving quite a bit, but we lucked out, and we didn't suffer much damage there, thank God. But it was a close call. Third thing we've identified is our captain, who is our shift commander, is currently still riding the front of the apparatus or driving the second ambulance to the hospital. He's often called upon by dispatch to make decisions for other emergencies going on in town. So he's distracted by, he's driving, trying to pay attention to the road. He's got a patient in the back with 2 members, and he's constantly being called on the radio. Several towns down Cape, some which are smaller than us, have adopted this policy of taking their shift commander off the truck and have him be a actual supervisor in a vehicle. So he gets there ahead of the apparatus. He either upgrades or downgrades the response. He also can visit the 2 other stations, make sure duties are getting done, training's getting done, any needs that they need. So currently, pretty much all the larger departments and some smaller departments to the west of us are currently doing this. Falmouth, Bourne, Sandwich, Mashpee, Centerville, Osterville, and Hyannis just implemented it last year. The departments to the east would like to do it, but they don't have the manpower yet, but they see the need as well. They just haven't been able to increase their manpower yet. The other thing we identified is the EMS officer, who's trying to do both fire and EMS training, is very overwhelmed. He has a ton of responsibility. He does the best he can to try to accomplish both. So we'd love to see, at some point, adding a training fire captain in charge of the fire side of training. Also, we'd like to see a fire prevention officer added to the 2 that we currently have. We're doing great on inspections, working with the town inspectors as well, building department, but we still see a need. We're lacking in some other areas that we just don't have the staff for. The other thing is the training budget. We're currently at $100,000, which is great. Very fortunate to have that. We'd love to see that increase at some point to $150,000. Training on duty. I'll give you an example. They were there yesterday at the old highway building. We're fortunate enough, the small park department section, the crews have been there doing some forcible entry and some roof ventilation work before they tear the building down. Yesterday, I was there watching the operations, and 4 medical calls at once came in during that operation. Left the captain, and 1 lieutenant left, and they all had to go on calls. So that happens every time we try to do some training. They try to train every day, but unfortunately, it gets interrupted. So the recommendations, we think increasing the shift strength 4 at a time is manageable and predictable. As again, I said, we already increased by 4 already. We'd love to keep that increment going, possibly every other year until we get up to the level we need to be. We'd like to budget the move at some point to get our dispatch to the upstairs at Station 3 so it's in a hardened facility and it's protected going forward. And we'd like to see the captain in the car. And also increase the staffing of a training officer, fire training officer, fire prevention, and a dispatch director. That's it. Questions?
No, I know you guys are extremely busy and face a lot of challenges. I don't really have have any data here that could help with any of your possible recommendations in terms of, when we hired the last 4, we were able to determine that that was basically a neutral cost. Do we know what any of these costs would be to address the challenges?
Yeah, when we had the studies done, their recommendations, I'll use Matrix, which was the latest study that we had. So increasing, if we added the 12, I'm not saying all at once, obviously, but if we added the 12 to get us up to that 18 level that they recommended, the overtime would be reduced significantly. They're saying up to 40%, and then that would be shifted to salaries to offset. So there would be a net increase, but I don't have the difference on that. But I certainly can get that for you.
Well, I think, if we're looking at doing 4 at a time, we just did 4. So have we seen the results of that, or do we know what 4 more? I'd like to have that information. We can't, really talk about it until we do. Dispatch, we have been talking about this for a long time. I don't think until the town has an overall plan with dispatch, that's something that we can act on at this time. We had a plan. Didn't go anywhere. The captain in the car we've been talking about for a very long time. What does that mean to a budget? Is it a vehicle? With the captain's there already. We have vehicles.
Yep. So we would put him in a command vehicle very similar to the deputies in mind. So currently the way it works, when the deputy or I show up, our vehicles have a command center in the rear of our Tahoes. We open the rear hatch, and the old Expedition had the same thing. And there's radios and dry erase boards and drawers filled with stuff to manage an incident. We have Marine radios, police radios. We have every radio in that car. There's 4 radios in both of our cars, including portable radios as well. So we would do the same thing for the captain. He would get there way ahead of us, especially in the middle of the night when we're not on duty. During the daytime, I can get there pretty quick if I'm in my office or the deputy, or if we're traveling between stations or town hall, we can respond with the apparatus and set up the formal command. But the better way to do it, 24/7, weekends, nights, is to have that gentleman or woman in the car to be the incident commander prior to our arrival. And like I said, it's worked well in other communities where they've been able to either get there and, you know what, it came in as a structure fire, it's an oven, food on the stove. We can downgrade the response. And so that helps, and that, those resources can be diverted someplace else.
How many captains are on shift in the evening?
So there's 1 captain, there's 4 groups of guys, and there's 1 captain per group. He's the shift commander, and there's 3 lieutenants. So in order for this to work, when the captain's not there, he would be replaced either by the senior lieutenant, would move up and be the shift commander in the car, and that's what other towns have done.
Does that position work out of the same firehouse?
Yes.
So basically, we're talking the expense of 1 vehicle.
Yeah, and we currently have vehicles in place now that we could use temporarily until we acquired a vehicle on the next capital cycle.
What staffing level, though, I think she asked, at what staffing level would you need to implement the captain?
Yeah, in order to get him off the piece, we would need to increase the staffing level up to the higher level.
Okay.
We can't do it currently right now because we need him to be on the piece because we don't have enough on duty.
I see. And what number, you need 16 to get that to happen, or?
Well, ideally the 12, but we could get it done with 8.
Okay.
But there would be, with 8, there would be times where we'd be shorthanded with the 8.
And in terms of staffing for a training officer, fire prevention officer, dispatch director, what are the costs associated with that?
Those would be not any overtime reductions, so those would just be a straight salaried increase to the budget. So a captain's position, your full-time captain.
So you're not giving the duty to somebody who's already there, you're looking for an additional?
No, what would happen is one of the lieutenants would move up as a promotion and become the fire training captain. One of the firefighters on the lieutenant's list would be promoted to lieutenant, and we'd hire a new firefighter, paramedic, EMT to come in to replace that person. So there would be a net increase of a lower firefighter's position as well. He would come in at a low rate, but then you'd have another captain, so you'd have a fifth captain.
5 captains.
6, I'm sorry, counting fire prevention. There's a captain in charge of fire prevention. So we have fire prevention set up in a way that the captain is in charge. There's a captain and a lieutenant in fire prevention. We want to mirror the same thing in the training division.
Is 6 captains, and I know everybody's structure is a little bit different, is that heavy for a department of our size?
Not when you have those other functions, and they're dedicated to those functions, but they can also respond during the day and help supplement the emergencies. So those are day positions. So the fire training captain, his primary job would be shift training with the crews, and he would manage all that and set up off-duty training as well.
What's the level of our EMS training now? Is that a captain or a lieutenant?
He's a lieutenant.
So why that level?
So you'd want one person in charge of the division. I call it, so we have operations division, which are the 4 captains that are shift commanders. The training division, you would have a captain in charge of that division. So he would come to a staff meeting, meet with the chief and the deputy and the other captains. Same with fire prevention captain. He's in charge of the fire prevention division. He has 1 lieutenant working under him. So from an organizational point of view, that's how it's done in other organizations as well.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
No, the only other comment, I think, at this stage, I mean, the budget already reflects a $260,000 savings from the addition of the 4 firefighters
Yes.
in overtime. So, I mean, that's, and you're running at those levels, so you've been able to accomplish that. So, I think the first stage of what is, a longer-term program of staff development and staff building is apparently successful at this point. So, I think that's, once you've had a time to settle on it, then I think it's appropriate for us to reconsider,
And we can have 2 safer grants running at the same time.
Right.
That's allowed as well.
Yeah.
So if we waited till, say, next year, we could put in for another safer grant for an additional 4, while this one hasn't run out yet.
Right.
That's allowed.
Okay.
Mark?
Thank you.
I have no questions. Thank you. It was
Thank
well
you.
done.
Tracy asked the question that I was interested in about the captain in the car, so I don't need to ask that or go over that. You talked about additional training on a national certification level for basically everyone.
Yes.
How was that done, number one, and at what cost? And how often, the training's annual, is it?
Biannually, every 2 years.
Every 2 years?
Yes,
So
every 2 years.
Can you just expound upon that a little bit?
Okay, so
As to what that training entails?
Yeah, so not every member expires. I wish it was on an every 2-year cycle. It might be easier for us, but so I just expired, or I will expire this April. So I had to go through a 2-year recertification process prior to this April 1st, and I've already recertified and gotten my new card. So years ago, we just had to be a mass certified EMT or paramedic, but now they made us become nationally certified. So there was an increase of that recertification process as well. The criteria stayed the same. The paramedic research stayed the same. It's just another fee we have to pay, basically, to be nationally certified. So it was an unfunded mandate, really, that was put on us.
And where do you go for where does the training occur?
We do it at our Station 3. We have an agency that comes in and provides the training for us for recertification.
Okay. So you don't think in terms of what the lesson is that is learned is really adding very much. It's more of an increase in cost for something you've been doing all along.
Yes, and there's also, they're talking about doing, so we have to do what they call hospital rounds. So the paramedics have to do it. They're mandated. They have to do 2 a year, and that's with an emergency room physician. I've got it automated now, so it can be a webcast, so you don't have to go to that facility, and that's worked out well. We can do it right at our Station 3 and have a video monitor going, and they review cases of calls that went well, and they're for teaching moments. So the paramedics they're talking about, so other agencies off Cape, the requirements and other medical directors are much more stringent than ours. We only have to do 2 per year. They're talking about increasing that to 4 to possibly 8 per year, which is going to put another burden on us financially as well. but that hasn't come through yet. But again, that would be another unfunded mandate, but we're part of this system. He's our medical director. If he wants to do 8 hospital rounds, we don't really have a choice. We have to abide by that. So that's what kind of happens. We get these things that come in, and it comes in the middle of a budget year, and I can't account for it, so you just absorb it and, hey, okay, we'll pay this, but then something else is going to suffer. We won't be able to pay that or fix that until next fiscal year. So that's what's been happening over the years. So we're very, very fortunate to get the extra money this year in the expense line. That'll be a big help for us.
All right,
So
thank you.
Thank you.
I do have one other question.
Well, there's another question.
Just, I think one of the things that was talked about in the matrix study was the number of instances, and I've forgotten the term that was used to measure that.
Concurrent calls.
Right. Is it contention or something like that?
Concurrent.
Concurrent.
We have the highest concurrent call volume that he's seen in a community this size, and that was amazing.
Do we have a handle on what has happened with that?
It continues to happen. Yeah.
Has it changed with the addition of the 4 people?
It's helped. It's helped. Again, we're not going to see the full effect of the 4 people for a full year. 2 of them are graduating this Friday. I'm going to Stowe for their graduation, actually. So those were the first 4. Those are the safer guys. The first 2 have already graduated. They're on and working on the floor. The second 2 graduate. They'll be on the floor starting next Monday. And so once we go through a whole year with that extra 4, we'll be able to measure so much better.
Yeah,
but having the extra guy is a huge benefit.
I think that would be helpful to us in coming with that data.
Yep.
In terms of, okay, here's what's happened as a result of adding those 4 people, and here's, it's really a level of service to the community that is measurement. So I think that would be helpful to come back and say, okay, here's what has happened already, and in this next stage, we're projecting this would happen. And I think that helps build some confidence in what
I'll give you a quick example. So when there's a medical call in South Yarmouth, there's 5 there. The minimum staffing is 5, 3, and 3. 5 in South Yarmouth, 3 in West, 3 in Yarmouthport. So when a medical call comes in South Yarmouth, 3 of them get in the first ambulance and they go to the call. That leaves the captain and 1 firefighter who's usually the engine driver. Now they got to recall a guy from home to come in to stand by the station. That's time and a half. So now there's 3 at that station. So, but what happens a lot with these concurrent calls, the second call comes in before that person gets in from home, especially at night. So those 2 get in the truck and they go, and oftentimes another ambulance from station 2 or 3 has to go meet them. Now we're pulling them out of their area to go drop a guy off because we don't have enough on duty to handle the volume. So if we could get to 6, 3, and 3 as a minimum with the next 4 increase, that would be huge for us. That would alleviate that guy waiting for him to come in from home and pulling a truck out of its area.
Okay.
So that's just one example. And that happens every day. Every day.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next one is YPD.
There's an updated presentation going around, so replace what I'm handing out with you, what's in the packet.
Thank you.
All right. Can you spare one of those Kit Kats?
You can have the whole bowl. Move the bowl from
Good.
over here to there.
Oh, see, I didn't get you that. Be embarrassed.
Hey, it's in my presentation. Good evening. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us tonight. And for people at home, this is Deputy Chief Kevin Lennon, and I am Frank Frederickson, the Chief of Police. We start off with our mission statement. The Yarmouth Police Department is a proactive police agency dedicated to excellence by ensuring quality customer service for everyone we serve by way of teamwork, accountability, and community involvement. Okay, highlights from the past year, we have 35,000 calls for service. Mental health substance abuse issues dominate calls, and they require a lot of extra effort, and to do so, we are also part of the International Association Chiefs of Police One Mind campaign, which is requiring us to get everybody trained in handling mental health and have a certain amount of the department, 25% of the department, trained at a higher degree, and we put it to use every day. We've gone through some promotions and restructuring due to retirements. We have recruitment and retention challenges. It's becoming tougher to get good people to come into policing. Dispatching is difficult to find good people because there's not a lot of colleges or prep for people wanting to get into the field that want to be in the profession of public safety dispatching. It's really become a specialized profession, but there's really not a roadmap to get to be trained in that ahead of time. So we're finding a lot of green people coming through the door, and we make our best guess hiring them at the time. And we've been fortunate to get some very good people, but it is not easy. Per the Matrix study, we promoted a sergeant, added a sergeant's position, not a new full position. We took a patrol position and made it a supervisory position to be in charge of the PAC unit. So that took place. Matter of fact, Sergeant Tom Hennessy is now the sergeant in the PAC unit. He just started that job 2 weeks ago. So we're starting to get feet on the ground with that. Traffic complaints and requests for services regarding traffic issues is throughout the town, whether it's year-round, could be Center Street maybe. A lot of parking issues that have crept up in the summer around the beaches. It's really a continued problem because the beaches are very popular and people just want to park anywhere they want. The other piece that you don't read about or see a lot is the increased amount of fraud and white-collar crime. It's phenomenal. That includes all of the phone fraud that we get. We don't try to publicize that too much as far as when someone's victimized, but we do put a lot of public statements out about how to prevent that. But I can tell you, nationwide, it's a tremendous problem. You saw that our burglaries went down significantly. We had less than 85, I think, total house breaks, car breaks, and business breaks. Those are record lows. We had far more white-collar and fraud cases with one person, one investigator that can really is trained to do all of those. So that's a new challenge, and we're going to look at our detective division and try to maybe refocus some of the efforts into that area. Budget overview. Our FY 2021 budget that you see there, those numbers, those do not reflect any labor relations agreement, so that's why you don't see a whole big increase there. That little bit of increase is based primarily due to step increases and some contractual changes. So we have followed the budget guidelines. The expense budget has a bit of an increase this year for two reasons. Some of them are contractual, but the other thing, there was a shift in paying for copiers. Sometime back, the copiers were absorbed by the IT division, so all our billing was through them. We never touched it, but there was a change in philosophy that those expenses get shifted to our budget. So they added some money in for that. They did add $10,000 for the cost of ammunition for training. We have been short on that for a number of years. The expense of ammunition continues to rise. I pretty much spoke to that on the just then. We did have $1,800 added for one officer who wasn't getting the education expense per contract. It wasn't in our original budget, but that was something we had to add in there. The other thing that has happened, and we spoke of it earlier at a previous meeting, was our overtime has remained very flat for the past few years. While our COLA increases during a 4-year period went up 11%. So that therefore increases our overtime. So the same amount of overtime that we were getting a few years ago, actually our overtime has decreased in the past 4 years. But it also, that increase in COLAs impacts our ability to deploy and train our officers. So it puts a kind of a struggle on all facets of the department, some of which we don't have control of, like court, for example. We're mandated to go to court. They have to go to court. We can't cut that. There's mandatory training that we have to do. We have to find ways to do it. We've done some shifting in our personnel to try to accommodate it with our reducing our staffing levels during certain hours. But we really shouldn't be doing any more of that. Challenges coming up. In the next 18 months, we anticipate about 7 retirements from various parts of the department. As the fire chief spoke, the unfunded mandates just keep coming, and we have to keep trying to find ways to accommodate that. Our expense budget, we have been very limited in that. We got a little bit of increase this year in it, in those areas that I told you about, but it just, every year it is, we get a budget with different categories, but it's crisis management. It really is. And it's almost, it is basically impossible to run the department the way it should be with the expenses we have. There are just a lot of things that come up. For example, this year we had a lock that broke in the cell block. We have to fix that. $4,000. $4,000 to fix a lock. You know, where do you come up with that? That's something we don't foresee. Town administrator's been good at trying to accommodate any of these unexpected expenses. So that is common across, I think, a lot of the departments in town. The community dispatch and records management system is basically reaching its life expectancy because of the company that we have is been bought out by probably the 4th time. If you want to explain that, Kevin, how that's working.
In 2000, we went with a company called IMC. That company was then sold to TriTech, and that has now been purchased by Central Square. So what we found out was that Central Square is no longer going to continue to enhance the program that we're using. They will maintain it, but they're not going to enhance it. So for any changes, like there are programs out there, there's a lot of mobile technology that we're not taking advantage of, reporting that we can't take advantage of. So what we're doing is we're trying to be proactive, and we're going to start looking at other companies that we can start and see what's out there, because IMC has been good to us. It's a good program. It has worked, but we know that there's going to be limitations on it coming up on the horizon. So we're going to be proactive and start looking to see what other programs are out there, especially, again, looking for, like, efficiencies, reporting. Right now, if the chief wanted me to run a report for him, it may take a little bit of time. It's not as easy. There's programs out there called Mark 8 and Next Gen that have third-party vendors that work with the company and make reporting very easy. But we also have to look at issues like, we spent a lot of time making IMC work with Munis. We'd have to make sure whatever we bring in does the same thing. But we do know, looking out on the horizon, that IMC, there will be an end of life to it. We just don't know when, and we want to make sure that we're ahead of that and not behind it when it happens. So, you know, we're looking at an acquisition of somewhere probably in the area of about $250,000 to buy the software and then have all of our last 20 years of data transferred into the new program. We didn't do that when we purchased IMC back in 2000, so we had to run 2 systems, and then the other system finally it just died. It was just an Access database, so we couldn't data mine that stuff. So we're looking to be a little more proactive this time.
Yeah, and the deputy has put together a group of officers and dispatchers to start looking into the different products that are out there. Some of those companies are very hungry and are looking to make good deals and kind of spread the costs out over a number of years instead of coming up with one lump sum at the same time. So we're looking at the options and making sure we get a good product that'll last for a long time. Something very important to us is our officer and staff wellness. That is, you can read enough stories about what is happening and how probably for decades and decades we haven't paid enough attention to the wellness of our personnel. That's very important. It's important to me. And it also is important to the town because it will, when we talk about retention, that's a key component, because you lose one officer to something unfortunate that could have been prevented, or that's a big impact on the town and the department. I mentioned earlier that the overtime is not proportionate with COLA increases. Most of the departments I talk with, they have when they submit their budgets, it always has the COLAs built into the overtime, so you're not always playing catch up. Okay. Our recommendations would be to increase our expense budget by about $25,000. That would probably be suffice to take care of all the costs that we need. We'd like to help our budget, expense budget, and I think it could work for perhaps some of the other departments, the fire department as well, is to create an account set aside for new hire uniforms. That was another expense. Like for this year, we hired 4 new officers. Those really aren't built into our budget, and the new uniforms for an officer is somewhere to $4,000 to $5,000 a piece. So, so you do four officers at $4,000 each. $16,000 coming out of your expense budget. And you don't know what you're getting one year from the next. There could be a year that you don't have any new hires, or you could have a year where you have 7 or 8. So it's a moving target. I think having a separate account set aside for that would be a big help, and it also wouldn't cause us so much stress when we're trying to make ends meet with our budget. Another important, probably very important piece we talked earlier about, again, it goes to recruitment and retention. It's keeping competitive with surrounding communities. There's work to be done. I think we had a discussion earlier about some of those objectives of what we could be doing, or how we can do that. But that's a real issue that needs to be considered and be in the forefront. I did not add any extra personnel at this point. I mean, we could have a wish list, but we'd be here for another couple hours.
Told them Christmas had already passed.
Yeah. So there's a lot to be said. And then we were asked to look over, put a little bit in about our capital requests that have been approved. The cruiser replacement, we'd asked for, I think, 160. They reduced it to 120. That should get us 3 vehicles. Radio system upgrade was approved for $200,000. That is a project that we've been trying to piecemeal through. There's also a major project coming through the state where the whole system is being replaced. We should, both police, fire, and other entities in town should gain some benefit through that. The major benefit that we'll have a better system. There will be some capital that we have to spend to make it work. It's a work in progress. The state has found a funding source for that. We had a joint fire police meeting with all the Cape departments 2 weeks ago, and went over the first round of what we can expect. There's more to come on that, but we still need the $200,000 for other parts within our system in the station, which will not be covered by the new system. They approved $100,000 for the firearms trailer that we had proposed. That is just one piece. We are working in partnership with the Yarmouth Police Foundation to try to get to our goal. The overall cost for the firearms trailer is about $750,000. So out of the capital money, they've set aside $100,000 for that. And then the taser replacements, those have to be replaced. The 5-year warranty is running out. So that's $50,000. Kevin, is that for the first set or
Rich, did we end up changing that?
No, they have CBC has a meeting on the 18th that'll be posted. Well, they'll discuss that, but as you proposed is kind of where we stand.
So what we do is we have to buy tasers for all the, we do our part-time and our full-time officers, and what we did years back when we went from the X26 tasers to the X2 to offset some of the costs, we did it over a 2-year period. So this $50,000 would be to replace the current stock half of the tasers, and then next year we would do the next half. The tasers, they run about $1,600 to $1,700 a piece. We have to get new holsters, new battery packs, and then training cartridges, because through taser we are mandated that each officer that carries a taser has to deploy it, has to deploy 2 cartridges. They have to show proficiency with the taser from 2 different distances, and then we do our use of force training as well. But our tasers are coming to the end of their warranty, and when they're out of warranty, they can't be repaired. A taser is a polymer. It's a sonically welded piece of polymer, and the only moving part is a safety. If anything else breaks on us and under warranty, we send it back, and we have to buy a brand new taser. They can't open it up and fix it for us. So it's a very important tool that our officers carry, and we have to make sure that they're all up and running.
The other piece of that is the batteries. The batteries are an important part, and after 5 years, they lose their ability to hold a charge. Then we move on to the free cash approvals. The free cash approved $200,000 to go towards the firearms trailer as well. Those 2 pieces, which for a total of $300,000, I think is going to get us very close to reaching our goal with what the foundation has. A lot depends on the final cost of the training building that is moving slowly, but it's in process. If they do what they said they can do during the meeting we had last week, we're going to be very close to be able to get that done. That'll be something you're all going to be proud to say you had a part of. We got $20,000 set aside for and approved for the investigation system for phones, cell phones. It's called a Cellbrite system. Technology has just taken us over, and it has impacted investigations immensely. There's hardly an investigation involved that doesn't have a cell phone component, and it allows us to go in and get a lot of different data. You know, obviously all legal, of course, after obtaining search warrants, et cetera. But if you don't have the equipment, you can't do it. We've been fortunate over the years to use Barnstable PD's equipment, and Brewster PD had one of the systems as well, but they no longer have it. Barnstable PD just can't accommodate us anymore because they just don't have time. Plus, you need a person that's able to run the system as well. So they can't do the work of everybody's. So for $20,000, we can get that important piece of equipment. There's one case that they waited 6 months just to have the phone analyzed. Once they got it done, they had the case wrapped up in a week because the data that was inside that phone put it all together. But it just sat there waiting to be analyzed. The technology, tablets and phones, that's just stuff that's not typically in our budget to replace. As you know, with your own personal items, they have a limited lifespan. So, you know, can we tell you exactly what piece is going to be replaced? We just know that they do break and need to be replaced. The furniture replacement is primarily for chairs throughout the building. Our furniture, most of the furniture in the station is 20 years old. We had one of our officers in the conference room. Those chairs are wearing out, and he was sitting in the chair during an interview, and the chair gave way. It was a second chair that gave way. Thank God he did not get injured, so we won't be needing the injury fund for that one. So that's what it's for, so we'll be able to replace the chairs throughout the building. And that's it.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Mark?
I don't have any questions. No, I think all our questions, or at least my questions, have been answered, so.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Norm?
I just have a question about the overtime that you brought up. In 2019, the overtime was, looks like it's, I'm going to use a round number, $250,000 more in actual dollars compared to the budget for 2020, and you're basically flat budgeted. What happened to the 250?
Where did it come from?
Right. In other words, yeah.
That came from a bunch of pieces. It came from the injury account, which we had a lot of injuries last year. Some of the money came from there. Some of it's on grant monies through drug investigations, the NADI grant, dispatch, the 911 grant, which gives us overtime to replace dispatches. I don't know how much that is.
So about $78,000. There's two grants that we use for dispatch training. One is, it's called the Support and Incentive Grant, and that pays for one full-time dispatcher, and then the balance of the money goes towards overtime. And then the other grant is for the training, and we share that with the fire department. So the way 911 works now, the money follows the person. We used to be able to, I could replace Kevin Lennon with Chief Frederickson. If I was going to training now, the money just follows me. So it's going to make it a little more difficult for us. But through that grant, we get about another $65,000 in overtime, because we have to take either one of the 9 sergeants, one of the 8 dispatchers, or we have 5 patrol officers who are all certified to work the 911 system. They have to go on overtime to the training.
And there's other pieces too. There's traffic seatbelt enforcement grants. There's smaller hits, like maybe 2,000 at a time. Bicycle safety, texting, and pieces. They come out quarterly, I think.
The total funding we get for the traffic grant for FY20 is just under $10,000, and then there's mobilizations. But to remain current with the grant and get all the funding, we have to do an additional 8 hours of traffic enforcement each month when the mobilization is not going on, and we have to submit those reports to the state. And if you fail to do that, they can pull the future funding. So they tell us that they're going to give us $10,000, but that's based on what the federal government's going to give them, so the funding doesn't always come through. Or if we miss a mark, they can take the money away from us. If we don't hit it, they would not allow us to participate in the next mobilization.
Okay. So I don't know if this may be a question for Rich. So the budget for 2021 for expenses, overtime, does that reflect those grants then?
No.
Okay, so
if they were to incur that overtime in the future, then it would be charged through those grants if they're available. But it's not in the budget.
okay, all right. Okay.
Thank you, Norm. Tracy?
Thank you very much for your presentation. There's always so much between our police and fire with all the things that you guys deal with every day. So I'm particularly interested in whether or not the town has any plan to address some of the challenges. What budget year would we be looking at that? The software investment, I know some of those things you're working on now, but there were other Is there a way that we can incorporate a equipment in uniform?
Yeah,
for-
so obviously, one of the concerns I've got right now is that until we get the school assessments in, we don't really know. So we remember this budget that essentially unfolded here tonight was drafted mostly in November, probably. So certain things like the uniform piece came to us after the fact, and we'll, depending upon how all the numbers flesh out, we'll make some adjustments, because it is a legitimate situation where that is in the contract. We are hiring at a pretty good clip, but to the chief's earlier point earlier tonight is, you know, they don't have to give us advance notice. In some contracts, for instance, if you have a severance component in it, you know, you could have a provision, if you wanted to pay out this year in the same fiscal year, you've got to give a 6-month notice or a year's notice. That would also be able to allow you to better reflect how many uniforms you might need on replacement. We don't have any of that, so I think it's fair to say that we probably need to boost that in there so we're not short all the time or robbing Peter to pay Paul, which is what the deputy and the chief just explained today. That goes on an awful lot. So we'll see what we can do. Some of those things clearly are high on the list of priorities now. The taser movement's another new one that came to light that's wasn't known to that level of extent back in November. So we've got some more configuring to do before it's finalized.
Okay, and the same thing with the software, will there be, I assume that if the IMS, is that what you said?
IMC. So we have our first demo scheduled for February 27th. We've got a company, Next Gen from Connecticut, coming in, and they have a pretty decent presence in Massachusetts. So we're going to look at their program. Their fee structure is much different than IMC. We own IMC right now. We house it on a server. And I can say the same kudos to Rich and his IT department, because they have done a yeoman's work making sure that that thing keeps running, because that's a heartbeat of the station. We own the product. What we are seeing now with newer companies, it's a license-based product, so we don't know what the fee structure is going to be. Everything's going to be cloud-based. But we do know that there is a considerable expense when you take old data and move it into whatever the new platform is. So we're not sure yet. We're going to set up multiple demos with different companies and see what's out there, kind of test the waters, and then see what fits us, and then go from there.
So this is on the horizon for a future budget, not necessarily?
Yeah, it wouldn't be this year. You know, we conceivably could be ready next year.
Okay.
If it all goes right. I did some preliminary meetings with one of Next Gen. Their pricing was pretty decent. You know, their annual fee is much less than what we're paying now. It's probably 10 grand a year less. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So, but we want to make sure it's the right product, because we are talking with salesmen. We did a site visit at Attleboro PD and took a look, but the deputy wasn't there, so I'm not the most technically savvy person. It looked pretty, but I've learned enough that let the experts really get a good look at it and make sure it's what we want.
This goes to my comments earlier about on-premises versus hosted or licensed applications. It's the exact same thing in the IT world that, police, fire, everyone's going to be facing. And then there's a component of they find what they want, but we got to make sure technically that it functions on our network. So you've got to collaborate and make sure that we're all on the same page. And it goes to the other need that I mentioned on project management. It's great to have a vendor to install it, but you need somebody on site that's going to work with that vendor and make sure they do what they're supposed to do, and it ends up working on our network when it's supposed to be.
So are the IT licenses within the IT department's budget, or is it within the department that uses it?
Well, that's one of the things we'll have to talk about going forward, not just police, but everybody, right? So it becomes, it's the lingo is a CapEx model versus an OpEx model. Is the product part of your operation and it's in the operating budget, or is it a capital thing because you're buying it like IMC you bought 15 years ago and you've owned it, and you pay an annual support license, which is in your budget, operating budget, but the big upfront purchase is a one-time thing. What we're looking at is moving off of that model to leasing tasers every 5 years. Licenses that are, instead of $250,000 every 10 or 15 years for an application, you're paying 20 grand a year. And it's the same thing with our Munis financial management system. In that case, the license is significantly more expensive than it is to pay the annual support on the product we own. But when you gotta do a big upgrade, which is what's on the horizon, then you're confronted with, we've got an additional significant investment again, as well as the time and difficulties in transitioning. So it's a lot to it.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're on target for this year, but future, we have a plan. I think to the chief's point, we've been talking about the static number for overtime for a few years now. Perhaps we need to look at what we did with the fire department in terms of if we add to the department, would there be, less of an overtime requirement? I think that that's something worthy of looking at, because perhaps it could be a savings.
I think the schedule change is clearly the easier thing than a staff addition to get there. So, we'll try to see how the contract goes. It is not lost on me, though, that, we are covering the delta that occurs every year with, that having the indemnification fund helps an awful lot for these long duration cases. Promptly hiring when replacements come available, and then, in year budget transfers. So, I know the chief's concern over it, but it's one of those things where I think we're in better control over that today than we were, just a few years ago, where it seemed to be real problematic. But you never know; it could change. So we'll continue to look at it.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Deputy Chief.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next of the big three, DPW, Jeff Colby.
I kind of missed those green slides that we had last night.
Rich, was that a bulb issue last night?
It's not a bulb issue.
It was not. It was just the way they colored the slides from CDM?
No. It's a malfunction with our projector.
Oh.
Fixed it this
Really?
morning.
I thought it was my eyes. I was like,
Yeah, it was your.
Cancel my.
You don't want the candies, Mr. Coley?
Or temptation.
That is a temptation.
Yes, thank you very much. Jeff Colby, Public Works Director, and here to talk to you about the DPW budget. Following the same format that you previously saw with police and fire, we've got the first slide as being the mission. Essentially what this says is that we have a customer service focus, and we'll maximize the use of the limited resources. We'll do the best we can with what we have, which is a challenge, but that's our goal. Highlights. I like talking about this slide here. Town meeting this year, as well as voter approval at the ballot to approve a new DPW building. That's a huge highlight for us. That project is going very well. It's under construction now, and you all participated in the groundbreaking last week. That was an exciting event. And we'll be seeing the police mechanics building as well as the parks building come down here within the next week. That'll be great. Fire has done a great job of removing part of that building, but the rest of it will come down next week. Parker's River Bridge project also began construction this past year, which is an exciting project as well. That is a project that was about 10 years in the making with design and planning and those efforts, but that project is well underway. They're working on the south half of that bridge. It's a two-phase or multi-phase project. Once the traffic is moved over, and that's anticipated to happen before Memorial Day on the new bridge, they'll tear down the north half of that bridge and begin construction there. So that is ahead of schedule, and that's going well. That contractor is MIG Corporation. They've done a number of bridges in Massachusetts, and they're doing a good job. Baxter Gristmill is nearing completion. Robert Hour's doing that project, and that is looking great. We'll be looking forward to maybe sometime this summer having a ribbon cutting out there. That is well on its way. The water is back into the fish ladder portion of the project, and so it's a real attractive project. They're really in a cleanup phase, loaming and seeding of that project, removing some of the pipes and that type of thing. But
Project has done really well because of the warm weather, or the better than usual winter weather we've had, so that's great. And Phase 2 of the bike trail project was officially completed, and we do expect a ribbon cutting as well as a bridge dedication. The bridge will be dedicated to George Allaire, as the board is aware, and we're scheduling that for April 2000 of this year, April of this year, working with Representative Whalen's office on a specific date. I don't have that specific date, but we're expecting that to be in April of this year. So just a quick snapshot to give the board and the public an idea of what the different responsibilities and functions are within DPW. Within building and grounds, there are 17 major buildings maintained, 26 parks and beaches, and 7 active cemeteries. That's within buildings and grounds. Highway has approximately 240 miles of roads maintained. That's both town and private. Last year, there was 3 plowing events and 13 road treatment events. We're a little bit off that pace this year, but I'm not complaining. That's a good thing, certainly for the budget. And waste management, our MSW, which is the trash, that was a slight decrease in the previous year of just over 8,000 tons. Construction and demolition was a 4% decrease, but that's still a healthy amount at just over 15,000 tons. And septage saw an increase of up to nearly 30 million gallons. Water pumped was also significantly higher at just below 1.6 billion gallons, just to give you an idea of the workload. So going through the budgets, I'll try to go through these fairly quickly, unlike what you saw with police and fire, where they had one budget where all their expenses and salaries were concentrated. In DPW, we have 10 individual funds or budgets. And again, I'll cover these quickly, and if you have questions, I'm certainly happy to answer those. The first individual budget is facilities. That's Fund 192. That is on track. That's located in the center of that slide. We were asked to comment on that for each one of these budgets, and the facilities budget is certainly on track. The difference between FY20 and 21 is identified on the next slide, and that is just moving the superintendent's wage from the water budget into this facilities budget. That is the increase that you see within this budget, and no change in the expenses. Trees, or Fund 294, is the next budget. This is on track as well. And the increase that you see in this budget under the tree expense is the $50,000 reoccurring free cash request over the last several years just rolled into the budget. So what you'll probably hear with many of the departments, and we can talk about a little bit later in a couple future slides, is that many of the either free cash requests or even capital requests maybe should be at some point shown in the operating budget. And this is a attempt to do that, at least for the tree budget. So it's not an increase over what we've seen over the last couple of years. It's just shown in a different place within the operating budget versus free cash request. The next fund is 421, which is the DPW admin and engineering. This is also on track. The expenses saw a jump between 2019 and 2020, where the fuel and electricity was being shown within that budget, but for 2021, those expenses are level funded. But this does show an increase in the wages for the town engineer's salary and moving it from the road maintenance fund to the operating budget. Having that in a capital fund is, not a appropriate way, in my opinion. At one point, it was moved during some tough budget times to the road maintenance funds, but this budget reflects that in the operating budget. And so that's just not a change in positions, but simply moving that from the capital request into the operating budget. The next fund is highway. That's 422. This budget is also on track, and the only changes are reflected on this next slide. There's some contractual changes in the salary or the wage items, relatively small amount as that contract was settled, and the expenses are the same. Snow and ice. This is the topic that this time of year is certainly a focus. I have this on track with the question marks after that, because as of right now, we're well under budget, but there's still a fair amount of winter to go. And so we're hoping to keep that under budget. If everything stays the same, that will be the case. But as I'm reminded regularly, March is still coming, and that's been a challenging month for us on Cape Cod the last couple of years. So we'll see where that goes. But with that said, there's no changes anticipated in this budget for wages and expenses. As the board is well aware, this is a budget that can be legally overspent if necessary, keeping the appropriate policymaking boards, yourself and the Finance Committee involved in what those decisions are. But because it's weather dependent, it is one that we are legally allowed to overspend if necessary. The next fund is sanitation. This is Fund 433. This is also on track. This is one that over the last few years we've regularly had Article number 1 on town meeting to supplement some funds, primarily related to construction and demolition costs. And the increase in the budget this year reflects that Article 1 from the previous year, where monies were supplemented the expenses for construction and demolition. So essentially that's the difference, and that's what this next slide says. The increases are related to those construction, demolition, and some small increases related to recycling as well. There is a reduction in the wages, and that's due to some retirements. When we have a retirement and we're able to bring a new person on, they're typically paid slightly lower than that long-term retirement, and that's the case in this particular budget. The next fund is septage. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about this because this is one of the budgets that we do have some questions or concerns about, and that was alluded to earlier by Rich when he talked about the wastewater articles and what septage is looking like. I have question marks on this slide relative to current FY20 budget and whether it's on track. To our best knowledge, it is, but there is a moving target out there with regards to the disposal of the wastewater sludges. We're working with different partners, both on the anaerobic digester front as well as some vendors to look at different solutions for disposal options, but they seem to be very, very limited. This is generally related to the PFAS. It's not just affecting drinking water that we're hearing a lot about, but it's also affecting wastewater and where you can dispose of those sludges. So to the best of our estimate, as we head into this next budget year, we're anticipating that expense for that sludge disposal to go up $300,000. I think that was Selectman Stone's question earlier, and that's reflected in this budget here under expenses. So approximately $300,000 is what we anticipate. Again, as I mentioned before, it's somewhat of a moving target. We don't have a fixed contract for that disposal, and so because of that, we're kind of at the mercy of the market or the places for disposal of that, and so that's one of our ongoing challenges. Like I said, we're looking at different options or solutions in the future. Anaerobic digestion might be one of those. Certainly working with the different regulatory agencies and looking for other disposal locations is an ongoing thing that we're working through to try to resolve that issue. Are there any questions about that? I'll pause here since that's probably one of the bigger changes or bigger unknowns with the budgets, and I don't know if it needs further dialogue on that issue or not.
Tracy? No?
Well, I guess my thoughts run to the wastewater plant that we're planning and thinking about the sludge disposal there and what that might mean for the costs, operating costs of the wastewater plant. But where does this go? Where does the sludge go? We take it, we haul it away, or is it on a train? Or
it's typically been trucked away. We don't have the capacity to deal with it on site. The anaerobic digester that we're investigating would have the ability to deal with that material on site and produce some beneficial energy associated with that. So that's why that's an attractive option at this point. But currently, for essentially the life of the plant, we've been hauling that to different locations. For many, many years, it went to Maine for land-applied applications. And you can Google and do some research with regards to that, and you'll see a lot of things popping up with regards to concentrations of PFAS within some of the agricultural lands up there. So the state of Maine said, nope, no more, you're not gonna do that. These PFAS chemicals are in everything. It's many people term that the forever chemical. So the disposal of that has become particularly problematic. So when the land-based applications were eliminated. We were able to bring it to landfills, lined landfills within New Hampshire. There's currently no approved locations for us to go within Massachusetts, so typically we're trucking it across state lines. And there are some options in Connecticut, but at this point, most of those landfills have already committed to their capacity to other projects or other entities, and so there's just limited location to dispose of that. So what we are doing currently is we are taking it to an incinerator in Cranston, Rhode Island, and that's our only outlet. There's some limitations associated with that we could talk about if you'd like more details, but the bottom line is we only have one option now, where in the past we've had multiple outlets for that. So we're at the mercy of that one disposal location. And even at that, we are hearing rumblings that maybe burning it's not the best as well. I mean, because of some air quality issues. So this is an issue that not just Yarmouth is grappling with, but the entire region is grappling with what to do with these particular sludges. So it's something that everyone needs to deal with. Everyone's up against these same issues.
So we haven't heard much about the anaerobic digester. Is that, I mean, where does that project stand at?
We're going to have a briefing for the board at the next meeting on that topic. We have I'd call it a very tentative proposal.
Yes, I think that's a good summary.
So we've been in a lot of, the due diligence phase has been very active the last few weeks for sure, but everything that we know we'll share with you next meeting.
Okay.
Right, and there's a sense of urgency, which is why some of these things are coming to light more quickly. Right.
Okay, thank you.
So Jeff, I don't have any questions now. I think we're all sort of grasping this PFAS problem and what it means for not just the town, but also the future projects. Like Norman said, you know, it's going to be a factor in terms of the costs for that project as well. But like you said, we're all wrestling with it. And we're not the only ones challenged or sort of surprised by it all.
There's a few more budget slides for Jeff to go through.
Okay,
Yeah,
so let's go through the rest of them and then resume. That would be great.
Absolutely. So the next budget is the water fund. That is $450. This is expected to be on track as well for FY20. The changes within this budget is there are some part-time salaries, so there's actually a reduction in the wages for water. There's some part-time salaries that in previous budget years had building staff as well as IT staff was within this budget, and this budget reflects the change to move those within other operating elements of the town budget. The expenses are a slight reduction, and that is due to some operating efficiencies. We're doing some of the water services and other repairs in-house, and so that has resulted in a reduction in some of those expenses. We're also looking to fine-tune our expenses to get to the right number because we currently have a consultant looking at the survey for the rates, and we want that to be properly reflected as to what that might look like going forward. So there is a reduction in the expenses so that we can recognize that in the study so we can accurately reflect what rates might be in the future. I do expect a draft of that report within the next month or two. The next one is cemeteries. That is Fund 491. That's also on track. It's a relatively small budget item. And what this reflects is a slight increase in the wages, and that is for part-time and seasonal wage adjustments, and no change in the expenses. The next fund is Park, and that's Fund 650. That is also expected to be on track. And as the slide indicates here on the next page, the seasonal wages are a slight increase for beautification team. Over the last 3 years, we've had 2 seasonal members that were supported by funds from Community Economic Development. We've been calling them the beautification team. They've been doing a great job with those items that haven't been able to be tackled by regular staff or the seasonal staff we bring on. One example of that is the weeds along Route 28, the curb. That team has been keeping on top of that, as well as many other projects that we just weren't able to handle within town. But this budget reflects shifting that within the operating budget versus using the CEDC funds for that. With that said, that wraps up the individual funds, but we were asked to look at the different challenges facing Public Works. We did talk a little bit about one of those, which is listed here, but the first one I listed was just water and wastewater projects for the future. We just have a large number of projects going forward. I mean, we're looking at miles of pipe for wastewater. We need to replace water mains associated with some of those projects, and also independently, we're looking at a water main replacement project, for instance, on Route 6A. There's no sewer plan for there, but we know that we need to upgrade our infrastructure, and so there's just a significant number of projects on the horizon, and that's just one of the challenges that we'll deal with going forward. As well as the increasing cost. We spent some time already talking about this, but the wastewater sludges, and you'll get an update, as the town administrator mentioned, for the anaerobic digester, which could be a potential solution for that item. And then just the regular supplemental requests associated with sanitation. Most of those, again, as I talked about when we looked at that fund, were related to construction and demolition. But I do have a recommendation in the next slide about how to deal with those going forward. And the other two here are increasing cost issues. One for vehicle maintenance. As we keep vehicles longer, the costs have gone up. Fortunately, we've been able to deal with those with free cash requests, which is again on the table for 2021. At some point, maybe that should be reflected in the operating budget, but that's certainly something for a future budget to look at. But right now, we're still dealing with the increasing maintenance costs in the free cash request. As well as facility maintenance costs. We're continuing to see those increase, particularly for HVAC maintenance. Again, that's another free cash request we've had reoccurring, and again this year, and that at some point maybe should be back in the operating budget when it's more of an operating expense versus capital. So the recommendations, essentially, I summed those up with when I listed the challenges, but the Water Resource Enterprise Fund is certainly one that will help capture some of those costs and pay for some of those projects, and you heard a little bit about that tonight. Sanitation enterprise fund would also be one that I would recommend that would help capture those costs associated with the C&D and other costs associated with sanitation within an enterprise fund. So there wouldn't be a particular hit to the general fund for those increases if the revenues were deposited in retained earnings like we do for septage or water for sanitation. Any increases associated with that could be captured in an enterprise fund. So that would be a suggestion there. And then I also just talked about the increases within the maintenance, vehicle maintenance and facility maintenance budget could be in the operating. A benefit of that for vehicle maintenance, and we're seeing it with the free cash requests, is that it is a more centralized way to address that. And I would certainly recommend continuing that approach so that if we have as we have the last couple of years, $100,000 free cash request, we can pay for most of the town's vehicle maintenance out of that one account. So if there is a savings, it's shown in one account versus, hidden within different budgets within the operating budget. So I would certainly recommend continuing to centralize and the efficiencies associated with that. We're going to see also a component of centralization with the new DPW building, with all the mechanics working out of one location as well. So with that said, that covers the operating budget. I don't know if if you have any questions related to the operating budget. I was asked to put a couple of slides together with regard to the capital budget requests and the free cash requests. But this is probably a good spot to ask if there's any questions about the operating budget.
I have a question on cemetery. I know you had talked about some of the challenges associated with independent contractors not living up to their to good standards.
Right, the same standards as the town was held to, right? Yes.
My wife happened to be on the Shoot Cemetery coming home from her walk the other day and saw an example of that.
Certainly.
And I'm wondering how that is going at this stage in terms of holding the contractors responsible and so forth.
Well, that's a great question. It's certainly an ongoing challenge, and the board was very supportive a couple weeks ago when we updated the policies, and we're in the process of distributing that formally to all the vendors. So they're getting the message, and it's partially an educational effort on the staff, certainly informing the contractors about the different standards and what's acceptable and what's not. So it's an ongoing process, and it's a little early, given that the board, supported those policy updates just a couple of weeks ago, but so far so good. I think the motion that Selectman Tully made was to come back to you in 6 months with an update, and we're planning to do so.
All right, okay, thank you.
My question isn't related to one of the challenges you identified with all the water and sewer projects. We're in the process of hiring somebody to help you with that? Where are we at on that?
Yeah, we're in the process of hiring a water and wastewater superintendent, which is just a modification of the water superintendent job description that the board supported back in December. So it's very early in the process as well. We've received a couple of applications. It's only been posted for a week or 10 days or so, but the response is so far so good. But even when we fill that position, that there's still the volume of work ahead of us is something we want to get the right person in place to assist with that. But even at that level, that's probably not the solution for all of the projects. I mean, we're talking about many, many millions of dollars worth of projects, and one person is probably not the solution to that, but it's certainly a piece of the puzzle and will certainly help with that. What I would recommend is there's also components related to project management we need to look at. When Rich covered Article 20, there was a component with regard to project management, or owners, OPMs, owners project managers, and that will certainly assist us going forward. And I recommend that we look at that for all of our major projects, because we need all the help we can get with this, large workload that's on the horizon. And I think those are two of the pieces to help accommodate that.
Yep. Thank you.
Jeff, thanks for the presentation again. I'm glad you talked about project management, because I think, to me, following the presentation and looking at all the work that's ahead, clearly management capacity
right.
is a significant challenge. We don't identify that, but we need to certainly keep that in mind, because we want to make sure that each of the projects that we're responsible for, we're also able to not spread ourselves too thin, but to make sure that there's qualified, capable management, with each of these projects.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm glad you raised that. Another question: sludge disposal. How many other Cape Towns are wrestling with this problem beyond us?
Everyone that has wastewater capacity is wrestling that.
Barnstable, Falmouth, us.
Town, Chatham. This anaerobic digester proposal could potentially help with some of those, maybe not the bigger ones right away, because they have a pretty significant volume of sludge to deal with. You also see that the volume of sludge out of a sewer treatment facility is less than a septic facility. We're already dealing with the septic tank or very concentrated waste, so it's a little more significant for us because of the volume of sludge we generate versus a wastewater plant, which is much less sludge. But everyone's struggling with it.
Yeah, are we all sort of struggling with it separately in the sense that we're trying to find work with our own vendors and others?
We haven't,
or is there an opportunity here for some kind of cooperative, collaborative, regional effort?
There's absolutely an opportunity to work together, and I think Yarmouth's taking a lead in that, and this anaerobic digester could be a component of that, but we're working with all the communities that are affected, and Yarmouth's taking a lead in that regard, but we're working together.
Yeah, so that project itself could lend itself to maybe even more collaboration in terms of helping to address it. Yeah. Thanks. The other question I had is we used to have a town engineer, then that position was gone, and now we've brought back the engineer position. I think
Correct.
One of the things that I'm just curious about in putting that position back in place is to the extent to which maybe there's been some cost savings associated with the work. Oftentimes when you lose that position, you find yourself in a situation where you're having to contract out a lot more for those engineering services. Would you venture to say that the town of Yarmouth has saved some, now that we have an engineer back in the town's employ? Do you think that position has provided some cost savings?
Absolutely, particularly for stormwater. We've contracted a lot of that out. Now we're doing some of the design in-house, so there's certainly examples of that. But just on the project management front, I mean, it was very timely, last April when we brought that town engineer position back, because we had a number of projects kicking off. Parker's River Bridge is a great example of that. And Baxter Gristmill, these are projects we don't have a owner's project manager on. They're small enough that we can manage those in-house. But, before we had the town engineer, you're looking at the project manager. I was
Right.
managing all those. So
I mean,
this discussion we're having about stretching yourself too thin is very clear. And now we're building a DPW building, which is going great, and we do have an owner's project manager for that project. So that has certainly helped with spreading the workload out and being able to manage those projects. But the town engineer is a component of that too. She's done a great job, hit the ground running because she was the acting town engineer in Barnstable before she came to Yarmouth, and she's really helped with the project management as well. But we just have a lot of projects coming up, so I can see that growing, that need growing as far as project management.
yeah, well, that's good, thank you. I hear she's doing a great job.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
Do you have one other question?
Okay, no.
Sanitation, when you brought up the idea of an enterprise fund, it got me thinking a little bit further about, some of the possibilities there. And I see a lot of trash trucks around. And I'm not sure where they end up taking their trash that they collect, around neighborhoods. Does it come into our facility?
It typically doesn't come into our facility. That would be the commercial transfer station, which was another fund component of the budget that, previous directors would have presented to you. But currently that's leased out to Covanta, so that commercial transfer station is where they typically go if they're not taking it off Cape or going somewhere else. But that's managed separately by a vendor, and it's not part of the budget presentation here.
Okay. So, what's the communities reach? What's the break point in terms of population and so forth, and in terms of having street pickup of trash compared to running the transfer station?
Well, that is a very challenging question on Cape Cod, because on Cape Cod, I've come to learn that everyone loves their residential drop-off disposal area. And that's somewhat unique for the country. When you go to other parts of the country, it's unheard of for even a community our size to have a drop-off facility. When I talk with, peers in other parts of the country, they look at me like I've got two heads, that we have a drop-off facility for, 24,000 people. In the summer, it might be 60,000 people. That's just unheard of. But Cape Cod, we seem to love our drop-off facility. So when I talk with my peers in other Cape Cod communities that have gone through the exercise and looked at, whether it makes sense to do curbside and close the drop-off facility, that's typically not a avenue that's pursued. We certainly could look at that and do the analysis, but getting away from drop-off facilities is part of the Cape Cod culture to have a drop-off facility. And
it also fits with dump picking.
That's right.
That culture.
Right.
Campaign.
Yeah.
Right. Where would you do these other activities?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to hang off the back of the truck.
Obviously, you've got a full plate right now.
There's a lot going on,
I suggest to you that you spend a great deal of time on that question, but I do think, the false economy of, gee, I could drop my trash off while I'm on the way to the golf course or something like that. Eventually that wears thin. I'm not sure what the economy really is in the final analysis. I also think that, we got all these trash trucks running around. I'm not sure what segment of the community they're servicing.
People that don't want to go to the drop-off facility, or businesses too.
I have a feeling that they're servicing some of the rental homes.
That's exactly it, Norm.
Yeah.
The seasonal homes, that volume of housing is increasing significantly. And I know, at least on my street, where they've gone from year-round housing to, Airbnb or seasonal. It's a trash pickup arrangement.
Sure. Yeah.
And it shows up on cue every week.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know how that affects that operation that is that we contract out essentially. It's an interesting pursuit of that question, I think.
I think one of the ways to look at it, Norm, is how many people have actually asked us to consider it or to study it or to push for it. I bet you in the letters file in the town administrator's office or the DPW office, there are not many letters coming in asking us to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that's at least some initial indication.
Well, I think it's also a matter of how steeply the fees increase. If there are future increases consistently in fees for dropping off.
But it would be
you know,
reflective, they're paying this, it would be reflective in the service.
The same cost of disposal,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, they're going to have to pay the same amount to dispose.
Understand, but people tend to start questioning, those kinds of things when the bills get higher and higher that they're paying out of pocket. And when they have to pay $300 for a fee for a year for the transfer station, they're going to say, geez, I could have somebody pick it up for that amount.
Right.
I doubt it.
No, well,
Or even if they picked it up for more, let's say they picked it up for $500 and you had a $300 sticker, they might say it's worth the extra $200.
What's the convenience worth, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, I think that's, like I said, I don't know where the
Falmouth
flip
does it.
point is on that, but
Yeah, and that was-
What you hear in Falmouth is the containers are blowing through the streets all day long because they put it down and it's empty, and then at the end of the day, there's trash barrels everywhere, and people don't like that either. So, there's
I think when we run out of things to do, Norm, we might want to put that on the list.
You want to move on to capital? You got a few comments
Certainly.
on capital?
Yeah, we had capital as well as free cash. So just a summary of what capital budget has positively recommended. For highway, there's a large dump truck that was on the list, and they've positively supported that. That's $190,000. C&D pad, that construction and demolition pad, is getting very tired. It's showing its wear. There's broken concrete. There's rebar that's been exposed from time to time. So the capital budget seems supportive of design and permitting for pursuing what we might do in that regard. Waste management truck for $43,000. I mentioned this earlier, but the HVAC at various locations is within the capital budget request. That's been the same the last few years at $50,000. This is the one I mentioned that maybe we should look at putting in the operating budget when it's able to be done. Town hall entry doors at $15,000. Drinking water fountain upgrades at $20,000. This is somewhat related to the plastic bottle ban and people being able to refill their reusable containers. So we'll be doing that. Peter Homer Park softball field, the infield, replacing that. Right now it's a clay material, and stone dust is the preferred lower maintenance product out there, and that's supported at this point. The bunker and field rakes, it's not a filed rake, that's a spelling error, but the field rakes associated with raking the fields is supported at $12,000, and a small front-end loader for cemeteries at just over $18,000, just under $19,000.
I'm surprised Tracy didn't collar you into putting a splash pad in that budget.
Not yet, but I do have one other thing I'd like to see on that list that
Well, could be a free cash request, so maybe it wouldn't fit in the $1.5 million.
I really love the trash barrel at Grays Beach Boardwalk to be moved.
Moved?
Yes, it's a beautiful view. And
Did you show up in your photos?
almost all of them. And it's just such an eyesore, and I just don't understand the placement of it. It's probably one of our most photographed places in town, and I know it's a silly thing, but it just, you walk on the boardwalk, it's right there, which is convenient, but perhaps it could be moved a little bit away.
Well, there used to be one on the other side of the driveway, other side, on the beach side.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was, I don't know if it's still there.
I don't think so. I think
I
it's
use the one at the
end of the boardwalk.
boardwalk all the time.
Okay, we'll certainly take a look at that. That wouldn't necessarily be a capital request, but we can add that to the list.
Had to say that.
As far as other items, and they're usually shown separately, at least within the capital budget, because these are water requests, these next five. But the well redevelopment, which is a good preventive maintenance program that we have for redeveloping the wells at $205,000. Facility improvements, which is our pump station safety and rehab, replacing trim, doors, roofs, that's funded at $1.3 million. Water tank painting at $215,000. Distribution system improvements, which are the water main replacements, at $250,000 this year. And production system hardware at $100,000. This is our SCADA system, or the computer system that runs the water and the pumps. The roadway improvements, this is the bond that was approved several years ago. It grows at the 2.5%, as the board is aware, and this year that 2.5% is reflected at just over $1.3 million. Stormwater improvements recommended at $225,000. This is a slight increase over the last few years, where it had been flat at $200,000. The Capital Budget Committee had appreciation that we have a number of stormwater improvements, not just water quality, but just maintenance of our infrastructure and the number of catch basins we have and the number of structures that need to be replaced on a regular basis. And so that growth within the stormwater improvements is reflective of that need. Also, free cash requests, there's really only two on the list that I can speak to, and those are the vehicle maintenance. That's the $100,000. I referred to it earlier about something that maybe could be in the operating budget at some point, and that's consistent with what it's been the last couple of years. That's been a good way to deal with like I said, the maintenance the increasing maintenance relative to keeping the fleet in service longer. And the wastewater planning at $200,000. This is also consistent with the planning funds of the last couple of years. Highlighted below that in the bullet are the different elements associated with that we expect to need over the next year. Land use controls are certainly something we'll be looking at. Notice of project change needs to be filed for our project for the Yarmouth plan, whether we go with DHY or whether we go with it alone. Fertilizer education, we've been making some significant strides with regards to stormwater improvements, but another component of the nitrogen reduction is fertilizer and having to deal with that. So education associated with that is a component of our planning efforts. It's in our wastewater master plan, and we should make some progress on that as well. Bass River Gulf design support, as well as the RAC support and DHY support, are all components of that wastewater planning, and also water quality monitoring. So that'll be something we'll have on an ongoing basis. We have needs within not only our plan, but just now that we've established some baselines for water quality, we wanted to continue that monitoring and show the progress that we've made throughout the improvements in the wastewater system. So that's an ongoing need for water quality monitoring. And that's essentially our free cash requests that I can speak to. If there's no questions, I do want to leave on a high note, and this is the same thing I showed the Finance Committee. There are a number of revenue items associated with Public Works, and we had a good increase in the beach receipts, up to just over $773,000. Sanitation also saw a increase as well, and you can see that that was just short of $3.8 million, a 3% increase. The stickers making up a 2% of that, and the construction and demolition material and other fee-based products being about 4% of that. Septage had a banner year at 43%. I don't expect that to continue because some of these other challenges we have related to the sludge disposal and our ability to take in septage at the facility, but it was a very good year. And water had a 5% decrease, which in the grand scheme of things is not bad. It certainly covered the expenses associated with that entity, but those total approximately $12 million on a $13 million Public Works operating budget. So this, I think, is good news, and just wanted to share that with the board. And with that said, I'm happy to answer any questions that weren't covered or you have further.
Anyone have any additional questions? Okay. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, thank you.
Next item, board and committee actions. Mark, do you have any appointments?
Yep, I do. These are alternates serving on the Zoning Board of Appeals. I'm recommending that we reappoint Dick Neitz, Doug Campbell, Susan Britta, and Tom Barron for one-year terms running through January 2021.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimously. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Approval of minutes of September 24th, 2019.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that they are approved unanimously. Upcoming agenda review.
September.
I do have one request on the agenda. Just looking down a ways, in March. Yeah, I appreciate the board, and probably Dan accelerating some of these reviews a little bit to accommodate my scheduling. And I do have one request. The final board recommendations are going to occur on March 17th, which is a
St. Patrick's Day.
Tuesday.
Very lucky day.
Yeah.
Is that that's a Tuesday.
Oh, maybe that's not what I was looking at. Okay. No, hold off. I'll come back to that in a minute when I get my schedule straight here.
And the next one, we have new wine and malt license for Papagino, weights and measures.
The weights and measures is going back and forth now with different towns weighing in on the IMA, so I'm not really sure when those are going to come back
They
to
want the
us.
fees increased, don't they?
Well, they do, and
Yeah,
I
I
think
don't
out
blame
of the towns that they have a cooperative agreement with, 3 of them have signed on to do something this year. We didn't say that we would. They said it'd have to be a board vote as to whether or not we would. But the issue has become the document continues to evolve. So I just was in touch with them the other day. It's in Sandwich now. So once they do whatever their legal counsel does with it, it comes back to us. So I'm not sure when it'll get to you, but I'm trying to get it to the finish line before town meeting for sure, so.
So that's a tentative on that.
Yeah.
All right. And then we have the Cape Cod Energy Park, FY21 budget public hearing, FinCom, CBC, and free cash, roadway banner application, Kyle, and that's about it.
Yeah. With the budget hearing, that might be in a little bit of a long meeting, so we're trying to move things around on the schedule to be considerate of your time, so.
Let me come back to that March 17th meeting. That's a Tuesday. I happen to be flying out that day. If the board could accommodate it and meet on Monday, that would allow me to attend that meeting.
Do you want to make some recommendations?
Well, that is the last meeting, I think, where we're voting on articles, right?
Yeah, for us, I
Yeah.
mean, Monday,
That's
we got to get it in either Monday or Tuesday, so,
Right.
yeah.
I'm just asking if we could meet it on the 16th as opposed to the 17th.
It's fine with me.
I'm only a quarter Irish, so it's okay with me, too.
Tracy?
The only thing I usually have on Monday nights is school committee, so
Well, that's right, that's your school committee night.
I always make myself available on Monday and Tuesday nights. I'm not retired yet.
I know. Us retirees have such terrible travel schedules.
awful. That's just jealousy.
What can I say?
talking,
I just would, I have to miss the 10th, and I really, I just, and I realize it's a request for a change in a meeting date, which we don't normally do. I know we did that for Eric, and then he didn't show up, but that's, but, if the board could accommodate.
Yeah, and by the
that,
way, Eric
thankful.
emailed me, he's very ill.
Well, I know he is tonight.
Had some
yeah.
kind of a thing going through the house, I guess.
Yeah, it hit China. Hope it's not
I hope it
that.
doesn't.
So I don't know what his schedule is.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't expect an absolute answer tonight. I just
let
wanted
me
to bring it up.
make an inquiry of his availability. You're available, right, Mark?
Yep.
And Tracy, you think you're available?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So,
Then we can have St. Patrick's Day off.
yeah.
There you go. Now that's thinking.
And Thursday.
Also
Yeah.
possibly schedule Monday, March 16th. It looks pretty good that can happen, Norm.
Yeah. Just,
Okay, any other comments or requests on?
The only other thing that I think I would ask is we have Emmy Small to follow up on from the last
Yeah.
meeting, and I think.
So, there's a walkthrough going to be held with, during school vacation week with our code enforcement people. Some of the items, it was brought to my attention that were in that 2016 report have been addressed. Most concerning were the electrical-related issues. Those have been resolved. Also, there's an ongoing school department master plan associated with what should go on with the building, and I do believe that there will be somebody coming down from MSBA potentially to take a look at that building as well. For even though the SOIs, the statements of interest, were due, I think, on last Friday, they are interested in taking a look at the building for future planning. So there's some movement on it, but I don't have anything specific to report on it right now.
Okay. I guess, I'm, not that I'd respond to the Cape Cod Times article that gave us a thumbs down for our comments on that. I thought our board was being proactive with
I don't think it
frankly.
was a thumbs down for the comment. I think that the thumbs down was because nothing had been done up to that point.
Right, yeah, well, in any case, in the big scheme of things, the school department has been under tremendous pressure long-term. So, it's not here nor there. Where we are now is what's important. And, responding to the situation and the potential for disaster, I think, is what's really important, so.
But I think your point's well taken. I think at some point we want to have an update on how things are progressing and what's going on. Particularly since it was a front-page story, and like you said, there's been some commentary about it.
We'll have something in one of the March meetings.
Yeah, I would hope that I would. I mean,
Great.
Opportunity being what it is, I mean, there is potentially a scenario, I mean, all this is in the school committee's realm, but talking about enrollments being what they are and future planning being what it is, we might find out that the most efficient maneuver would be to plan for the future, which would be to do something at Station Avenue Elementary School and get you out of that building altogether. So it's kind of picked up a certain amount of momentum on it, but it's really up to the school committee to get the report back from their master planner on that as to what would be the good options to do. So.
Well, I think it's important to take the opportunity to work with the school committee on this, because I think expressing our concern about the immediacy of the issue is important.
I think you got some action, and like I said, I think opportunity being what it is, this is a grand opportunity to look to the future as to what, right-sizing the building footprint for the population of kids, so.
Okay.
There you go.
Fair enough.
All right. Any individual items? Norm?
No. I'm all set.
No. Mark?
Nope.
Okay. Consent agenda.
Yes, sir. On the consent agenda, there was an add-on, and it's related to the St. Patrick's Day Parade Committee request. I believe you have something in the packet associated with that. A couple of things that these come every year to us. It seemed like the parade came very early this year, but one vote that they would like to know is whether or not the board would be attending the parade. So if I could get kind of a census count, we'll make the plan, we'll have the golf carts again and the magnetic signs, but they do like to know whether or not there's going to be a contingent from the board in the parade.
What is the date again?
The
March
7th of
7th, it's a Saturday.
March, yeah.
I
11
don't
o'clock.
think I'm
Yeah.
available. Pretty sure I'm not.
Tracy will do it.
No, I'm not available.
As long as we're not behind the pooping horses again.
Oh,
Okay, Mark, you gonna be around?
But they were pretty
For
good at
the,
that.
for the parade, yes. I'll be
Scooping it
there.
up.
Okay. I
They were
should be.
good, they were
I
good.
should be here too.
okay.
And I'll check with Eric. Eric,
And we
here.
need a lot of candy.
Well,
a
Eric's
lot.
here. He does it if he's around. He's not
Yeah.
always here, but
Okay.
No ball dropping on that. I'm adamant about the candy this year,
yeah,
far in advance.
and lots of it.
Yeah, a lot.
Some people need to be given a ration so that they don't over-distribute.
Over distribute, that's right.
Wow.
There's an obesity
Free
epidemic out there.
society.
The other one is
Candy
I
Dan.
wasn't accusing you.
Permission is part of the consent agenda, permission to allow the parade to go forward. The other request that they have on here is a request to waive the police and fire administrative costs. They are a recipient of $22,000, $22,500 in tourism fund, and per the board's policy, if you are a recipient of tourism fund, they don't waive the fees.
How much are the fees?
Or you do?
We don't
No.
waive the fees. We don't, I don't,
They apply for those fees
they, every year they apply.
in the grant.
Well, I don't have the specifics on what the grant was, but they were given $22,500. And YPD had sat with the parade organizers to go over what the detailed contingents. Part of the problem with the parade is it's over a very large geographic territory. But I believe that everybody's on the same page as to what the fees are for and how much they're going to be. So we just would need a vote to, one would be to authorize the parade, and B, to not waive the fees. So we'll probably pull it out of the consent agenda for that reason.
So to authorize the parade's an easy one, so we have a motion for that.
So moved.
I moved, all right.
I'm assuming the
You're
people are
doing
gonna
it
be in
separately?
it, they are gonna authorize it.
All right.
So
I'll
we have a
second that.
motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
And then the second one is to not waive the fees, consistent with the board policy.
So moved.
Yep, second.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously.
Thank you. And then lastly, there's some donations in the employment contract.
All right, we have a motion to move the
Second.
consent agenda. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, consent agenda passes unanimously. Town administrator updates.
I don't have any.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.